They said she was too wild to marry, too stubborn, too dangerous. In 1876 Colorado Territory, Lydia Monroe carried a Winchester rifle like other women carried parasols, and the town of Sage Creek couldn't stop whispering about it. They mocked her behind lace curtains and over church pews until the day bullets started flying and that rifle became the only thing standing between survival and slaughter. This is the story of how a woman's courage silenced her critics and won the heart of the one man who never doubted her. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dawn air bit cold across the Colorado plains, sharp enough to make a person's breath hang white and ghostly in the half-light before sunrise. Most folks in Sage Creek were still wrapped in quilts, clinging to the last warmth of their beds. But Lydia Monroe had been awake for an hour already. She stood 30 paces from the weathered fence behind her father's general store, feet planted shoulder-width apart, her dark braid hanging down her back like a rope that could pull her thoughts into order. In her hands, the Winchester rifle felt like an extension of her own will, solid, reliable, honest. She'd spent so many mornings out here that her fingers knew every groove in the stock, every scratch in the metal. The rifle had been her father's gift on her 18th birthday, 3 years ago now, and it had become more than a tool. It was her voice in a world that rarely wanted to hear what a woman had to say. 6 tin cans lined the top rail of the fence, glinting faintly as the first pink light touched their surfaces. Lydia raised the Winchester to her shoulder, closed one eye, and let her breath settle into the rhythm her father had taught her. Slow in, pause, slow out, pause. Between the heartbeats, between the breaths, that's where the shot lived. The rifle cracked sharp across the morning silence, and the first can leaped into the air, tumbling end over end before clattering somewhere in the scrub grass beyond. She worked the lever, smooth and fast, and fired again. Another can flew, then another. The rhythm built like a drum beat, crack, lever, until all 6 cans had disappeared from the fence, and only blue gun smoke drifted lazy in the still air. Well, I'll be damned, Lydia spun, the Winchester already coming around, and her heart jumped into her throat before she could stop it. A man sat easy on a rangy buckskin horse not 20 feet behind her, one hand resting on the saddle horn and the other holding the reins loose like he had all the time in the world. He wore a dusty brown hat pulled low enough that the early light caught the shadow of his jaw, but left his eyes mysterious, and his grin was the kind that suggested he'd just witnessed something he'd remember for a long time. "Didn't mean to startle you, miss," he said, tipping his hat back just enough that she could see gray eyes the color of winter clouds. "But I've been riding since before dark, and I have to say that's the finest shooting I've seen in 6 territories." Lydia's pulse was still hammering. She lowered the rifle but kept it ready across her body, finger off the trigger but not far from it. "You've got a dangerous habit of sneaking up on armed women." The man's grin widened. "Seems to me the danger's all on my side." He swung down from the saddle with the kind of grace that came from spending more time on horseback than on foot, and his boots hit the dirt with a soft thud. Up close, she could see he was trail-worn, dust on his clothes, stubble on his jaw, that bone-deep tiredness that came from long days under open sky. But his eyes were clear, and they held something she didn't often see when men looked at her. Respect, maybe, or curiosity without the usual judgment attached to it. "Name's Elias Carter," he said, not offering his hand because he seemed to understand she wouldn't take it. "I'm trailing a cattle outfit up from New Mexico, and we're stopping in your town for supplies before pushing north." He nodded toward the rifle. "That Winchester, it's a yellow boy, isn't it? 1866 model?" Despite herself, Lydia felt a flicker of surprise. Most men couldn't tell a Winchester from a Spencer unless they were holding it. "It is. My father had it before me. He taught you well." Elias glanced at the fence, where the cans had been. 6 shots, 6 hits, and fast enough that you could have been defending yourself if this was real trouble. That takes practice. "It takes more than practice," Lydia said, some of the stiffness leaving her shoulders. "It takes someone willing to teach you when everyone else says it's not worth the effort." Something shifted in Elias's expression, a shadow of understanding that made her think he knew what it was like to go against what everyone expected. "Well," he said quietly, "whoever they are, they're fools." You know what I thought watching you shoot just now? He settled his hat back low on his head, and that grin came back, warmer this time. I thought, that's the kind of woman I'd marry. For a moment, Lydia couldn't find words. Men in Sage Creek had been telling her for years what kind of woman she should be. Quieter, softer, more interested in needlework than marksmanship. They looked at her rifle the way they might look at a snake in the church pew, something dangerous and out of place. And here was this stranger, dusty and half exhausted from the trail, saying the exact opposite like it was the simplest truth in the world. Before she could form a response, Elias tipped his hat one more time. I should let you get on with your morning, Miss Monroe, she said, finding her voice. Lydia Monroe. Miss Monroe. He said it like he was committing it to memory. I expect I'll see you around town. If you're the one who runs the general store, I'll need to stock up before we head out. That's my father's store, Lydia said, but he's away in Denver on business. I'm minding it while he's gone. Elias nodded slowly, something thoughtful settling into his features. Then I'll make sure to stop by. He gathered his reins and stepped into the stirrup, settling back into the saddle with that same easy grace. As he turned the buckskin toward the road, he looked back over his shoulder. For what it's worth, Miss Monroe, I meant what I said. Don't let anyone tell you that rifle makes you less of anything. Far as I can see, it makes you more. Then he was riding away, the horse's hooves raising little puffs of dust on the hard-packed road, and Lydia stood there with her Winchester cooling in her hands and her thoughts spinning like those tin cans she'd shot off the fence. The eastern sky had gone from pink to gold, and somewhere in town a rooster crowed, announcing the day whether anyone was ready for it or not. She turned back toward the house, but her mind wasn't on breakfast or the store opening or any of the usual morning routines. It was on gray eyes and a grin that didn't mock, and on words she'd never expected to hear from any man, let alone a stranger passing through on his way to somewhere else. That's the kind of woman I'd marry. The words followed her inside like a melody she couldn't quite shake, and for the first time in a long while, Lydia Monroe found herself wondering what it might be like to be seen exactly as she was, rifle and all, and to have that be enough. More than enough. Everything. By the time Lydia opened the general store at 7 o'clock, Sage Creek was stirring to life. The settlement wasn't much to speak of. A wide main street of hard-packed dirt, flanked by wooden buildings with false fronts that made them look grander than they were. There was the saloon, the sheriff's office, the bank, the hotel, the feed store, and the church, with its modest white steeple. At the end of the street, the blacksmith's forge was already glowing red, and the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil rang out like a heartbeat for the whole town. Monroe's general store sat right in the middle of it all, a two-story building with the store on the ground floor and living quarters above. Lydia's father had built it 12 years ago, back when Sage Creek was barely more than a spot on a map where a creek actually ran year-round. Now the town had maybe 300 souls on a good Sunday, and the store was the center of their commerce. Everything from flour and coffee to rope and horseshoes, lamp oil and canned goods, bolts of fabric and ready-made shirts. Lydia propped the door open to let in the morning air and began her routine, sweeping the floor, straightening shelves, counting the cash drawer to make sure it matched yesterday's ledger. The work was familiar, almost meditative, and it gave her time to think. Her father had been gone for 2 weeks now, and his letters from Denver suggested he'd be another week at least, maybe longer. He was settling an estate matter for his late brother, something complicated involving property and debts and lawyers who charged by the hour. In the meantime, Lydia ran the store alone. She could handle the inventory, manage the customers, balance the books. What she couldn't always handle was the whispers. "Morning, Lydia." She looked up to find Mrs. Sarah Langford standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the bright morning sun. Mrs. Langford was the closest thing Sage Creek had to high society. Her husband owned the bank. Her daughter had married a lawyer in Denver, and she held court every Sunday after church services, dispensing opinions like they were divine revelation. She wore a deep blue dress with black trim, her silver hair pinned up in an elaborate style that probably took her maid an hour to arrange. "Morning, Mrs. Langford." Lydia set the broom aside and wiped her hands on her apron. "What can I help you with today?" Mrs. Langford stepped inside, her skirts rustling. She had a way of moving that suggested she expected the world to rearrange itself to accommodate her. I need 2 yards of the cream muslin and a spool of matching thread. I'm making new curtains for the parlor." "Of course." Lydia moved to the fabric section, her fingers running over the bolts until she found the right one. She pulled it down and carried it to the cutting table, measuring out exactly 2 yards with the wooden yardstick her father had notched himself. As she worked, she could feel Mrs. Langford's eyes on her, that particular quality of attention that came before unwanted advice. "I saw you this morning," Mrs. Langford said, her voice deceptively light. "Out behind the store with that rifle of yours." Lydia kept her focus on the fabric, marking the measurement with a piece of chalk. "Just practicing, same as always." "Yes, well," Mrs. Langford sniffed delicately. "That's what I wanted to speak with you about, dear. People are talking." "People are always talking." Lydia picked up her scissors and made a clean cut along the marked line. "That's what people do. They're saying you're becoming rather eccentric. A young woman, living alone, shooting guns like some kind of outlaw. It's not proper, Lydia, and propriety matters, especially for a woman of marriageable age." The scissors paused, just for a heartbeat, and then Lydia continued cutting. "I'm 21, Mrs. Langford. If I'm not married by now, I expect the town's already written me off as a lost cause." "That's exactly my point." Mrs. Langford leaned forward, her voice dropping into what she probably thought was a confidential tone. "You could still make a good match, dear. Mr. Tucker at the feed store is a widower, and he's asked after you. And there's that nice young man from the hotel, James Pritchard. He's looking to settle down." Lydia folded the cut muslin with more force than necessary and reached for the thread. "Mr. Tucker is 50 years old and smells like grain dust, and James Pritchard can barely look a woman in the eye without blushing." "Well, you won't find anyone if you keep scaring them off with that rifle." Mrs. Langford's voice rose, losing some of its sugary coating. "No man wants a wife who can outshoot him, Lydia. It's not natural." For a moment, Lydia considered several responses, each more cutting than the last. But she'd learned over the years that arguing with Mrs. Langford was like arguing with the weather, pointless and exhausting. So instead, she set the muslin and thread on the counter and named the price, her voice flat and professional. Mrs. Langford paid, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. As she gathered her purchases, she paused at the door. "I'm only trying to help, dear. I'd hate to see you end up alone, too proud for your own good." Then she swept out into the morning sunshine, leaving Lydia alone with the smell of fresh-cut fabric and the bitter taste of other people's expectations. The morning passed in a steady stream of customers. Old Mr. Chen from the laundry needed soap and starch. The widow Peterson bought coffee and sugar and spent 15 minutes complaining about her rheumatism. Tommy Haskins, who worked at the feed store and fancied himself a charmer, came in for tobacco and spent twice that long trying to convince Lydia to let him take her to the church social on Saturday. "Come on, Lydia," he said, leaning on the counter with what he probably thought was a winning smile. He was young, maybe 23, with blonde hair and a swagger that exceeded his actual accomplishments. "It's just dancing and pie. Nothing scary about that." "I'm not scared, Tommy. I'm busy." "Busy doing what?" "Standing behind this counter?" He reached out and tapped the wood for emphasis. "You need to have some fun once in a while. Let a man show you a good time." Lydia picked up his coins and dropped them into the cash drawer with a decisive clink. "If I want to have fun, I'll do it on my own terms. Now, if you're finished shopping, there are other customers waiting." Tommy's smile faltered. He glanced behind him at the empty store, then back at Lydia. "You know, you'd be prettier if you smiled more, and if you left that damned rifle at home. And you'd be smarter if you left while you still have your dignity." Lydia's voice was ice cold now. "Good day, Tommy." He left, muttering something under his breath about uppity women, and Lydia felt the familiar weight of frustration settle on her shoulders. It was always like this. Men who wanted her to be smaller, quieter, more grateful for their attention. Men who saw her rifle as a threat instead of a skill. Men who couldn't imagine that a woman might have dreams and ambitions that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. The door opened again, and Lydia looked up, ready to paste on her customer service smile. But it wasn't another customer. It was Elias Carter, hat in his hands, those gray eyes finding hers across the store like a compass finding north. "Miss Monroe," he said, and his voice carried something warm and genuine that made the morning's frustration seem suddenly distant. "I hope I'm not interrupting. You mentioned you were minding the store, and I figured now was as good a time as any to stock up." Lydia felt something ease in her chest, something she hadn't even realized was tight. "You're not interrupting. Come in." Elias stepped inside, and the space seemed to shift around him. Not because he was large or loud, but because he moved with a kind of calm presence that made everything feel more settled. He looked around the store with genuine interest, taking in the shelves of goods, the neat organization, the way everything had its place. "This is a good setup," he said. "You can tell someone cares about it." "My father built it," Lydia said, coming around the counter. "Taught me the business from the time I could count change." "What do you need?" Elias pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Made a list. See, we're 10 men heading north, and we've got about a week's travel ahead of us. Need coffee, flour, dried beans, salt pork if you've got it. Ammunition, too. We've got rifles, but we're running low on cartridges." As he read off the list, Lydia moved through the store, gathering items with practiced efficiency. Elias followed, and she was aware of him in a way that felt different from other customers. He didn't hover or make awkward small talk. He didn't comment on how strong she must be to lift the sacks of flour, or express surprise that she knew where everything was. He just watched, with that same respectful attention he'd shown that morning when she was shooting. "You run this place by yourself?" he asked, as she stacked supplies on the counter. "While my father's gone, yes. I've been doing it since I was 16, though. It's not as hard as people seem to think." "I don't imagine anything's as hard as people think when you're willing to learn it properly." Elias leaned against the counter, watching her work. "How long's your father been gone?" 2 weeks. Another week? Maybe more." Lydia weighed out the coffee beans on the scale, adjusting the counterweight until it balanced perfectly. "He's settling his brother's estate in Denver. Legal matters." "So you're alone here." There was something in the way he said it, not judgment or concern, but simple acknowledgement. "I'm fine," Lydia said. "I can handle the store and take care of myself." "I saw that this morning." Elias smiled. "I'm not questioning your ability, Miss Monroe. Just observing." She looked up at him, trying to read what lay behind those gray eyes. Most men, when they commented on her being alone, were either suggesting she was reckless or offering themselves as protectors she didn't need. But Elias just seemed genuinely interested, like he was putting together pieces of a puzzle and appreciating the picture they made. "How much ammunition do you need?" she asked, moving to the locked cabinet where her father kept the more valuable goods. 2 boxes of 44-40, if you've got them." Lydia unlocked the cabinet and pulled out the ammunition, noting the weight of the boxes in her hands. "You expecting trouble on the trail?" "Always expect trouble," Elias said. "That way you're ready when it comes, and pleased when it doesn't." He paused. "You carry that Winchester of yours around town?" "Not usually, but I keep it close." Lydia set the ammunition on the counter with the rest of the supplies. "Why?" "Just thinking." Elias straightened, his expression growing more serious. "My trail boss, he mentioned something when we came through the last town. There's been word of the Barlow gang operating in this territory. You heard of them?" A cold finger traced down Lydia's spine. She had heard of them. Everyone had. The Barlow gang was a group of outlaws led by 2 brothers, Roy and Jack Barlow, who'd been robbing banks and stages across Colorado and New Mexico for the past 2 years. They were known for being violent, unpredictable, and very good at disappearing into the wilderness before the law could catch up with them. "I've heard the name," Lydia said carefully. "But they usually hit bigger towns. Sage Creek doesn't have much worth stealing." "Maybe." Elias didn't look convinced. "But you've got a bank, and banks have money, and sometimes these gangs, they hit smaller towns because there's less law to deal with." He met her eyes. "I'm not trying to frighten you, Miss Monroe. Just be careful. Keep that Winchester close." Lydia nodded slowly. "I appreciate the warning." They finished the transaction in a more somber mood. Elias paid in silver coins, counting them out carefully, and Lydia helped him carry the supplies outside to where his horse was tied. The buckskin nickered softly as they approached, and Elias ran a hand down its neck with the easy affection of a man who trusted his horse as much as any human. Where are you camped? Lydia asked as Elias began securing the supplies to his saddle. About a mile north of town. There's a good spot by the creek with grass for the horses. He worked quickly, his hands sure on the ropes. We'll be here 2 days, maybe 3, letting the cattle rest before the push north. And then? Then we're driving them up to a ranch outside Cheyenne. After that, he shrugged, not looking at her. I suppose I'll find the next job. That's how it works when you're trailing cattle. You go where the work is. Lydia found herself wondering what that kind of life was like. Always moving, never settling, home being wherever you happened to stop for the night. It sounded lonely. Free maybe, but lonely. Must be hard, she said, never staying anywhere long enough to really know it. Elias finished with the ropes and turned to face her, and there was something in his expression that suggested she'd touched on a truth he didn't talk about often. It has its challenges, he admitted. You see a lot of country, meet a lot of people. But you're right, you never know any of it deep. You're always just passing through. You ever think about settling down? The question was out before Lydia could stop it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was too personal, too forward. But Elias didn't seem offended. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, and she had the feeling he was deciding how honest to be. I think about it, he said finally. More than I used to. But settling down, that requires having somewhere to settle and someone to settle with. Most places I've been, I'm just another drifter. And most women, he smiled, but there was sadness in it. Most women want a man who's already established, a house, a business, something solid. They don't want a cowboy with dust in his pockets and no prospects beyond the next drive. Maybe you're asking the wrong women, Lydia said quietly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. The kind of moment that feels suspended, like the world has paused to let something important happen. Then the moment broke as a commotion erupted down the street. Shouting, the sound of hoofbeats, and suddenly 3 riders were galloping through town raising dust and whooping like it was a celebration. Lydia recognized them immediately, cowboys from one of the outfits that sometimes passed through, young and wild and full of Saturday night energy on a Wednesday morning. Elias's jaw tightened. "Excuse me," he said, and swung up onto his horse with swift grace. He rode toward the commotion, not fast but with purpose, and Lydia saw him intercept the leader of the group, a big man with red hair and a beard that covered half his chest. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Elias lean in close, saying something that made the red-haired man's expression shift from defiant to sheepish. A moment later, the 3 riders had turned their horses and were walking them sedately down the street instead of running them. The red-haired man tipped his hat to Elias, and there was respect in the gesture. Elias rode back to where Lydia stood. "Sorry about that. Some of the younger hands forget where they are. You're not with that outfit? Different crew, but we're all in the same trade, and we're all guests in your town." He looked down at her from the saddle, and his expression was serious. A man who can't respect where he is doesn't deserve to be there. Lydia found herself smiling. That's a good philosophy. It served me well. Elias touched his hat. I should get back. But thank you for the supplies, Miss Monroe, and for the conversation. Lydia, she said impulsively. You can call me Lydia. His smile was like a sunrise. Lydia, and you can call me Elias if you're so inclined. Elias, she repeated, testing how it felt to say his name. It felt good. Right. He turned the buckskin and started to ride away, but after a few paces he stopped and looked back. That offer I made this morning about you being the kind of woman I'd marry, I meant it, just so you know. Then he was riding away for real, and Lydia stood in the dusty street with her heart beating faster than it had any right to, watching him go and wondering what in God's name was happening to her careful, controlled, independent life. The rest of the day passed in a blur. More customers, more transactions, the endless rhythm of commerce. But Lydia's mind kept drifting back to gray eyes and a quiet voice saying words no one else had ever said. That's the kind of woman I'd marry. As if her rifle made her more instead of less. As if her independence was something to admire instead of something to tame. By the time she closed the store at 6 o'clock, she was exhausted but too restless to settle. She made herself a simple dinner, bread and cheese and yesterday's stew heated over the stove, and carried it upstairs to the living quarters. The space was small but comfortable. A sitting room with her father's favorite chair by the window, 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen. Pictures on the walls showed her mother, who died of fever when Lydia was 7, and various relatives scattered across the territories. Lydia sat by the window and ate her dinner while watching the town settle into evening. Lamps were being lit in windows. Cool. The saloon was starting to get noisy. Somewhere a dog barked, and somewhere else a baby cried. Ordinary life in an ordinary town. Except nothing felt ordinary anymore. She thought about what Mrs. Langford had said, that she'd die an old maid, too proud and too peculiar, and maybe it was true. Maybe she would never find a man in Sage Creek who could see her as she truly was. But for the first time, she wondered if that was because she'd been looking in the wrong place, or because the right person hadn't come along yet. Until maybe now. The thought was ridiculous. She'd known Elias Carter for less than 12 hours. He was a drifter, a cowboy passing through on his way to somewhere else. In 2 or 3 days, he'd be gone, and she'd never see him again. Getting attached to a man like that was the fastest way to heartbreak. But still, that smile, those words, the way he'd looked at her like she was exactly who she should be. Lydia finished her dinner and washed her dishes, trying to be practical. She had a store to run, a father who trusted her to manage things while he was gone, a life that worked even if it wasn't perfect. She didn't need complications. She didn't need romance. She certainly didn't need to start building dreams around a man who'd be nothing but a memory by the end of the week. She picked up her Winchester from where it leaned by the door and checked it automatically, a habit so ingrained she barely thought about it anymore. The rifle was clean, oiled, ready, 6 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Always prepared, always alone. The thought came unbidden, and Lydia pushed it away. She wasn't lonely. She was independent. There was a difference. But as she climbed into bed that night, listening to the sounds of Sage Creek settling into darkness, she found herself thinking about what it might be like to not always be alone. To have someone who saw her, really saw her, and didn't want to change anything. Someone who understood that strength wasn't something to apologize for. Someone who thought a woman with a Winchester was exactly the kind of woman worth marrying. She fell asleep with that thought warming her like a banked fire, and dreamed of gray eyes and dusty trails and the sound of tin cans flying off a fence in the thin gold light of dawn. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of day that promised to be scorching by noon. Lydia woke early, as always, and went through her routine, dressing in a simple brown skirt and white blouse, pinning her braid up in a practical style, making coffee and biscuits for breakfast. She ate quickly, her mind already on the day's tasks. There were invoices to update, inventory to check, an order to place with the wholesaler in Denver. She was halfway through her coffee when she heard hoofbeats outside, multiple horses moving at a steady pace. Curious, she went to the window and looked out to see a group of riders, maybe 15 or 20 men, making their way down the main street. They rode good horses and wore working clothes, and at the head of the group was a man who carried himself with the authority of someone used to being in charge. The cattle drive, Lydia realized. These must be the men from Elias's outfit, come into town for supplies or entertainment or both. She watched them pass, looking for a familiar face on a buckskin horse, but she didn't see Elias among them. Disappointed in herself for being disappointed, she finished her breakfast and opened the store. Wednesday was usually a slow day, giving her time to work on the books and organize the stockroom. She'd just settled at the counter with the ledger when the door opened and Sheriff Tom Boone walked in, followed by his deputy, a young man named Charlie Reeves. "Morning, Lydia," Boone said, tipping his hat. He was in his 50s, with a gray mustache and sharp eyes that missed very little. He'd been sheriff of Sage Creek for the past 8 years, and while he wasn't the fastest gun or the toughest lawman, he was fair and honest, which counted for a lot. "Your daddy still in Denver?" "Yes, sir. Another week at least." Boone didn't look happy about that. "Well, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. You heard about the Barlow gang?" Lydia's stomach tightened. "A little. Someone mentioned they might be in the territory." "More than might be." Boone pulled a folded paper from his pocket and spread it on the counter. It was a wanted poster showing sketched faces of 5 men. The headline read, $500 reward. The Barlow Gang, armed and dangerous. These came in yesterday from the marshal's office in Denver. The gang hit a bank in Pueblo 2 weeks ago, killed a clerk, and wounded a deputy. They've been working their way north ever since. Lydia studied the faces on the poster. The Barlow brothers, Roy and Jack, were shown prominently, along with 3 other men whose names she didn't recognize. They all had the hard, cold look of men who'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, though she thought she knew. "Because they target small towns with banks, and we've got one." Boone tapped the poster with one finger. "And because you're here alone, running a store full of valuable goods. These men, they don't discriminate, Lydia. They'd rob you as soon as look at you, and they wouldn't hesitate to hurt you if you got in their way." "What do you want me to do? Close the store?" "No, but I want you to be careful. Keep your rifle close. Don't open early or stay late. If you see anyone suspicious, and I mean anyone, you come find me immediately." Deputy Reeves, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, Miss Monroe, but maybe you should stay with someone until your father gets back. Mrs. Langford, or the widow Peterson, someone like that, just to be safe." Lydia felt her jaw tighten. "I appreciate the concern, Deputy, but I'm not leaving my father's store unguarded because of something that might happen." "It's not might, it's when," Boone said bluntly. "I've got a bad feeling about this, Lydia. The gang's been hitting towns every 4 or 5 days, and it's been 6 days since Pueblo. We're right in their path." "Then double the guards on the bank," Lydia said. "But I'm staying here." Boone studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're as stubborn as your father, you know that?" "I'll take that as a compliment." It wasn't entirely meant as one. But his expression softened. "All right, but you promise me, anything suspicious, anything at all, you come running, and you keep that Winchester loaded." "Always do, Sheriff." Boone and Reeves left, taking the wanted poster with them, and Lydia stood behind the counter feeling cold despite the warming day. The Barlow Gang, armed and dangerous, coming this way. She thought about what Elias had said. Be careful, keep the Winchester close, and felt grateful for the warning, but she also felt a stubborn pride that wouldn't let her show fear. She'd been taking care of herself in this store for years. A gang of outlaws wasn't going to change that. Still, when she went upstairs to fetch the Winchester, she made sure it was fully loaded, and she kept it leaning within arm's reach behind the counter for the rest of the day. The morning passed quietly with only a handful of customers. Lydia worked on the ledger, recorded the inventory, and tried not to jump every time the door opened. Around noon, the heat became oppressive, and she propped the door wide to let in any breeze that might be stirring. The street outside was dusty and mostly empty, shimmering in the sun. She was just considering closing for an hour to escape the worst of the heat when a shadow fell across the doorway. She looked up, hand instinctively moving toward the Winchester, and then relaxed when she saw Elias Carter standing there, hat in hand, looking apologetic. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," Lydia lied, her heart still racing. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, I was wondering if I could buy you lunch." The question was so unexpected that for a moment Lydia just stared at him. "Lunch?" "Yes, ma'am. There's a cafe down the street, Mrs. Chen's place, and I'm told they make a decent meal. I thought you might be hungry, and I'd appreciate the company if you're willing." Lydia's first instinct was to say no. She didn't close the store during business hours. She didn't take lunch with strange men. She didn't. But then she met Elias's eyes and saw nothing but genuine interest, no presumption or pressure. Just an invitation, freely given, that she could accept or decline without judgment. "All right," she heard herself say. "Let me close up." She locked the cash drawer, hung the "Back Soon" sign on the door, and picked up the Winchester. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Expecting trouble at Mrs. Chen's?" "Sheriff Boone says there might be." "The Barlow Gang." Elias's expression darkened. "He told you?" "This morning. Showed me wanted posters and everything." Lydia locked the door behind them and fell into step beside him. "He wants me to close the store or stay with someone. I told him no." "Of course you did." Elias said it without mockery, more like he'd expected nothing else. "But the sheriff's right to be worried. These men are dangerous, Lydia." The easy use of her first name sent a small thrill through her, and she had to force herself to focus on the conversation. I can handle myself. I know you can, but there's handling yourself against one drunk cowboy, and there's handling yourself against 5 armed outlaws who've already killed. He looked down at her as they walked. I'm not trying to question your abilities. I'm just saying maybe having backup wouldn't be the worst idea. Are you volunteering? The question came out more flirtatious than she'd intended, and Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. But Elias just smiled. If you'll have me, yes. They reached Mrs. Chen's cafe, a small building with a faded awning and the best Chinese food in 3 counties, according to those who'd tried it, and Elias held the door for her. Inside, the air was cooler, scented with ginger and soy sauce. Mrs. Chen herself, a tiny woman with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted them with a nod and pointed to a table by the window. They sat across from each other, and for a moment Lydia felt suddenly self-conscious. She'd never done this before. Never sat in a cafe with a man who wasn't her father, never had lunch that felt like it might be courting. She didn't know the rules, didn't know what to say. But then Elias started talking, easy, comfortable conversation about the cattle drive, about the country he'd seen, about a time when his horse had bucked him off into a creek and he'd had to walk 3 miles back to camp soaking wet and covered in mud. He told the story with such humor that Lydia found herself laughing, really laughing, in a way she hadn't in longer than she could remember. Mrs. Chen brought them plates of fried rice and vegetables with chicken, and they ate while talking. Elias asked about the store, about her father, about what it was like growing up in Sage Creek. And Lydia, surprising herself, found that she wanted to tell him. She talked about her mother, who died when she was young, about her father teaching her to shoot because he wanted her to be able to protect herself, about the loneliness of being different in a small town where different usually meant wrong. It's not that I don't like people, she said, pushing rice around her plate. It's just that they all seem to have this idea of who I should be, and when I don't match it, they don't know what to do with me. Elias nodded slowly. I know what you mean. I grew up in Missouri, on a farm. My father wanted me to stay, work the land, marry a local girl, have a mess of kids. Good, steady life, but I couldn't breathe there. Too small, too set. So I left when I was 17 and I haven't been back since. Do you regret it? Sometimes. Mostly, no. He met her eyes. I think some people are meant to stay in one place and sink roots deep, and some people are meant to move, to see what's over the next hill. Neither one's wrong. They're just different. But you said you think about settling down. I do. More and more. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. But settling down, that's not just about stopping in one place. It's about finding the right place, the right reason, the right person. His eyes found hers again. I've been to a dozen towns in the last year alone. Nice towns, some of them. But I never felt like staying, until now. Lydia's heart kicked hard against her ribs. You've only been here a day. Sometimes a day's enough to know. Elias's voice was quiet, serious. Sometimes you meet someone and everything that seemed important before just shifts, changes perspective. They looked at each other across the table, and the cafe seemed to fall away. Lydia felt like she was standing at the edge of something vast and uncertain, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. She'd built her life around independence, around not needing anyone, but here was someone who made her want to reconsider, who made her wonder if maybe strength wasn't just about standing alone, but about choosing who to stand with. Mrs. Chen appeared with a pot of tea, shattering the moment, and Lydia busied herself pouring while trying to calm her racing thoughts. They finished their meal talking about lighter things, the weather, the quality of Mrs. Chen's cooking, whether it would rain later in the week. But underneath it all ran a current of something deeper, something neither of them was quite ready to name, but both felt. When they stepped back outside, the afternoon sun hit them like a hammer. Elias walked Lydia back to the store, and she unlocked the door with hands that were steadier than she'd expected. Before she could go inside, Elias touched her arm gently. Thank you for the company, he said. I enjoyed it more than I can say. So did I. Lydia found herself smiling. Maybe we could do it again, before you leave? I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. He settled his hat on his head, that familiar gesture she was already coming to recognize. And Lydia? About what we talked about, the Barlow gang. I meant what I said. If they come, you'll need backup. My outfit's camped just north of town. You send word, and I'll come running. Promise me. Elias, promise me. The intensity in his voice surprised her, but she could see he meant it. All right, I promise. Good. He touched his hat and walked away, and Lydia stood in the doorway watching him go, the Winchester heavy in her hand and her heart beating a rhythm that felt like the start of something she'd never expected but might have been waiting for all her life. The afternoon heat pressed down on Sage Creek like a physical weight, turning the air thick and still. Lydia reopened the store and tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting back to lunch with Elias, the way he'd looked at her across the table, the quiet intensity in his voice when he'd made her promise to send for him if trouble came. She'd spent years convincing herself she didn't need anyone, and now here was this man making her question everything she thought she knew about what she wanted. Around 3 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed and Tommy Haskins swaggered in, accompanied by 2 other young men from the feed store. They were laughing about something, that particular kind of loud male laughter that came from wanting everyone to know you were having a good time. Tommy's eyes landed on Lydia, and his grin widened. Well, well, he said, leaning against the counter in a way that suggested he thought he owned it. Heard you had lunch with one of those drifters today? That true, Lydia? Lydia kept her expression neutral as she set down the inventory list she'd been working on. I had lunch with a customer. What can I help you gentlemen with? A customer. Tommy snorted and looked at his friends. That what we're calling it now? Because word around town is you were looking mighty cozy with that cowboy at Mrs. Chen's. Heat rose in Lydia's cheeks, but she kept her voice level. My personal business is none of your concern, Tommy. Now, are you here to buy something or just to waste my time? One of Tommy's friends, a lanky boy named Pete, elbowed him in the ribs. Come on, Tommy, we need those nails for Mr. Henderson. But Tommy was on a roll now, his pride stung and his audience eager. I'm just saying, it's interesting. You turn down every decent man in this town, but some stranger rides through and suddenly you're all smiles. Makes a fellow wonder what he's got that we don't. Manners, for one thing, Lydia's voice had gone cold. And the good sense to know when he's not wanted. Tommy's face flushed red. You think you're better than us, don't you? With your fancy rifle and your independent ways. But let me tell you something, Lydia Monroe. You're going to end up alone and bitter, and when you do, don't come crying to any of us. I wouldn't dream of it. Lydia picked up the Winchester from behind the counter and set it deliberately on the surface between them, her hand resting near the trigger guard. Now get out of my store. For a moment, Tommy looked like he might argue. His jaw worked and his hands clenched into fists, but then Pete grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door, muttering apologies over his shoulder. The 3 of them left in a cloud of wounded masculine pride, and Lydia stood alone behind the counter, shaking with anger, and something else she couldn't quite name. She'd dealt with men like Tommy all her life. Boys who thought rejection was a challenge, who couldn't understand that no meant no and not maybe later. But today it stung more than usual, maybe because she'd just spent an hour with a man who'd shown her how different it could be, how easy it was to talk with someone who actually listened, how good it felt to be seen. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. A few more customers came and went, but Lydia's mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about the wanted poster Sheriff Boone had shown her, about the Barlow gang somewhere out there in the territory, moving closer. She thought about her father, safe in Denver, unaware of the potential danger brewing in his absence. She thought about Elias, camped north of town with his cattle outfit, and the way he'd made her promise to send for him if she needed help. By the time she closed the store at 6, Lydia was exhausted. She locked up carefully, checking the door twice, and carried the Winchester upstairs. The living quarters felt emptier than usual, the silence heavier. She made herself dinner, just beans and cornbread, nothing fancy, and ate while watching the sun sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She was washing her dishes when she heard voices in the street below, raised in argument. Lydia dried her hands and went to the window, careful to stay back from the glass where she couldn't be seen. In the fading light, she could make out a group of men outside the saloon, Cowboys from the various outfits camped around town, drinking and getting rowdy. It wasn't unusual for Wednesday night, but something about the energy felt different, more aggressive, more dangerous. As she watched, one man shoved another, and suddenly fists were flying. The fight spilled into the street, more men joining in, and Lydia saw Sheriff Boone come running from his office, Deputy Reeves right behind him. It took them several minutes to break up the brawl, and by the time they did, 2 men were bleeding and everyone was shouting. Lydia turned away from the window, her stomach tight with unease. The whole town felt on edge, like a storm was building just beyond the horizon. She checked the Winchester again, a useless gesture since she'd already checked it twice, and made sure all the windows were locked before climbing into bed. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was fitful and full of shadows. Thursday morning dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds piled up against the mountains and the smell of rain in the air. Lydia woke feeling unrested, her dreams having been full of nameless anxieties and half-remembered dangers. She went through her morning routine mechanically, dressing, pinning up her hair, making coffee that she barely tasted. The Winchester stood by the door where she'd left it, and she found herself checking it yet again before heading downstairs to open the store. The street was quiet, too quiet for a Thursday. The usual morning bustle seemed muted, as if the whole town was holding its breath. Lydia unlocked the store and began her opening routine, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something bad. Around 9 o'clock, Mrs. Langford came in with her daughter-in-law, a mousy woman named Catherine, who rarely spoke unless spoken to. Mrs. Langford needed thread and buttons, and she kept up a running commentary about the fight last night, the state of morals in Sage Creek, and how things were so much better when she was young. Catherine trailed behind her like a shadow, agreeing with everything and offering nothing of her own. "It's those cattle outfits," Mrs. Langford declared, examining buttons with a critical eye. "Bringing their rough men into our decent town. The sheriff should run them all off before someone gets seriously hurt." "The cattle outfits bring business," Lydia said, keeping her voice neutral. "Without them, half the shops in town would go under." "Business isn't everything, dear. Safety matters more." Mrs. Langford selected 3 buttons and brought them to the counter. "Speaking of which, have you reconsidered staying with someone until your father returns? With all these rough men about, it's simply not safe for a young woman alone." "I'm fine, Mrs. Langford, but I appreciate your concern." "Concern that you consistently ignore." Mrs. Langford's voice sharpened. "I saw you yesterday, having lunch with that drifter. The whole town saw you. What would your father say?" Lydia's patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. "My father taught me to make my own decisions and live with the consequences. He'd probably say I'm doing exactly what he raised me to do." Mrs. Langford's mouth pinched into a tight line. "You're being foolish and headstrong, Lydia. That cowboy will leave, and you'll be the one left with a ruined reputation." "Then I'll deal with that when it happens. Will there be anything else?" Mrs. Langford paid for her buttons with icy dignity and swept out, Catherine scurrying after her. Lydia stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge hard enough to hurt, trying to calm the anger burning in her chest. She was so tired of being told what to do, how to live, who to be. Tired of a town that measured a woman's worth by how well she conformed to their narrow expectations. The morning dragged on, punctuated by customers who all seemed to have opinions about Lydia's lunch with Elias, about the cattle outfits, about the rumors of the Barlow gang. By noon, she was ready to close the store and hide upstairs, but she'd never been one to run from discomfort. She was restocking the canned goods when the door opened and Elias walked in, and something in her chest eased at the sight of him. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well either, but his smile was genuine when he saw her. "Morning," he said, removing his hat. "Or afternoon, I suppose. I was hoping to catch you." "Well, you caught me." Lydia set down the cans she'd been holding. "What brings you by?" Elias glanced around the store, making sure they were alone, then moved closer to the counter. "I wanted to check on you, after our conversation yesterday, and with everything that's happening." "I'm fine," Lydia said automatically, then softened when she saw the real concern in his eyes. "Truly, just tired of everyone in this town having opinions about my life." "Let me guess, they're talking about us having lunch." Talking is putting it mildly. You'd think we'd committed a crime the way some people are carrying on. She sighed. Tommy Haskins came in yesterday afternoon and made sure to tell me exactly what he thought about it. Elias's expression darkened. What did he say? Nothing I haven't heard before, that I'm too proud, too particular, that I'll die alone. Lydia tried to make her voice light, but the words still stung. The usual. He's wrong. Elias said it flat and certain, like it was a simple fact. You're not too anything. You're exactly who you should be, and anyone who can't see that is a fool. Lydia felt something warm bloom in her chest. You don't really know me. We've had one lunch. I know enough. He leaned on the counter, his gray eyes holding hers. I know you run this store better than most men could. I know you can shoot like you were born with a rifle in your hands. I know you're brave enough to stand alone when the whole town wants you to be someone else. That's more than enough for me to know I want to know more. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, and Lydia felt that same sensation she'd felt yesterday, like she was standing at the edge of something vast and unknown, and the only question was whether she was brave enough to step forward. My outfit's moving out tomorrow, Elias said quietly. Driving the cattle north. Should take about 10 days to reach Cheyenne. Lydia's stomach dropped. Tomorrow? Dawn, we've rested the herd as long as we can and the weather's turning. We need to move before the storms come. He hesitated, then reached across the counter and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. But I'm coming back. But You don't have to. I want to. His grip tightened just slightly. Lydia, I've been drifting for years, telling myself I was free when really I was just lost. But since I rode into this town and saw you standing there with your Winchester, shooting tin cans like they'd personally offended you, I haven't been able to think about anything else. I don't know what this is between us, but I want to find out. If you're willing. Lydia's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. I'm willing, she whispered. But Elias, what if... The door burst open, cutting off whatever she'd been about to say. Sheriff Boone stood in the doorway, his face grim. Lydia, I need you to close up the store and come with me. Now. Elias straightened, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun on his hip. What's happened? The Barlow gang was spotted 20 miles south of here this morning. They're headed this way, and they're moving fast. Boone's voice was tight with urgency. We're evacuating the women and children to the church. It's got the thickest walls and the best defensive position. I'm not going to the church, Lydia said immediately. I'm staying here. Lydia, this is my father's store, Sheriff. Everything we own is here. I'm not abandoning it. Boone looked like he wanted to argue, but Elias spoke first. She won't be alone. I'll stay with her. Now hold on, Boone started, but Elias cut him off. My trail boss is a reasonable man. When I explain the situation, he'll understand why I need to stay behind. You'll need every gun you can get if those outlaws come, and I'm a fair shot. He looked at Lydia. That is, if Miss Monroe will have me. Lydia's mind was racing. Part of her wanted to protest, to say she didn't need protecting, that she could handle this herself. But another part, the part that had been alone for so long, was grateful beyond words that someone wanted to stand with her. Not in front of her, not instead of her. With her. I'll have you, she said quietly. Boone looked between them, clearly unhappy, but recognizing a losing battle when he saw one. Fine. But you stay inside, you keep your heads down, and if shooting starts, you defend yourselves, but you don't be heroes. Understood? Understood, Lydia and Elias said together. Good. Boone pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. It's just past noon now. If the gang keeps moving at the pace they were this morning, they could be here by nightfall. I'm positioning men at the bank and the sheriff's office. I'll put someone across the street from here too, just in case. But Lydia, he met her eyes. If things go bad, you get out. The store's not worth your life. I'll be careful, Sheriff. I promise. Boone nodded and left, moving with the quick purpose of a man with too much to do and not enough time to do it. The moment he was gone, Lydia turned to Elias. You don't have to do this. You could be in Cheyenne in 10 days, getting paid, moving on to the next job. You don't owe me anything. This isn't about owing. Elias moved around the counter until he was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. This is about choosing, and I choose to stay. Lydia looked up at him, at the steady certainty in his gray eyes, and felt something shift inside her. All her life she'd been fighting to prove she didn't need anyone. But maybe the real strength was knowing when to let someone stand beside you. When to stop being alone, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. "Thank you," she said softly. Elias smiled. "Thank me when this is over and we're both still standing." He glanced around the store. "Now, let's figure out how we're going to defend this place." They spent the next 2 hours preparing. Elias rode out to the cattle camp and explained the situation to his trail boss, a grizzled veteran named McCreary, who took one look at Elias's face and said, "Go, we'll manage without you." He returned with his rifle, ammunition, and a grim determination that matched Lydia's own. Together, they moved through the store, assessing angles and vulnerabilities. The building was solid, thick walls, good doors. But there were too many windows, too many ways for someone to get inside if they were determined enough. Elias helped Lydia move heavy barrels and crates to block the lower windows, leaving just enough space to shoot through if necessary. They stacked supplies on the upper floor: water, food, ammunition, blankets. If they had to hold out for a while, they'd be ready. "You've done this before," Lydia observed as Elias positioned a barrel for maximum cover. "Not exactly this, but I've defended a few camps from raiders and rustlers over the years. Same principles apply." He straightened and wiped sweat from his forehead. "The key is to make it harder for them to get in than it's worth. Outlaws are like water. They follow the path of least resistance. If we can make this place look too difficult, they might move on to easier targets. Or they might decide to make an example of us. That's why we have rifles." Elias's expression was serious. "Lydia, when the shooting starts, and it might, you do what you do best. You shoot straight, you shoot true, and you don't hesitate. These men won't show you mercy just because you're a woman. In fact, that might make them worse." "I know." Lydia checked her Winchester for what felt like the 100th time that day. "My father taught me a long time ago that being a woman means you have to be twice as good and twice as careful. I'm both." "I don't doubt it." Elias paused, then reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, so intimate, that it made Lydia's breath catch. "I just want you to know, whatever happens tonight, I'm glad I met you. I'm glad I stayed." "Elias, let me finish." His hand lingered near her cheek. "When this is over, when your father comes back and things settle down, I want to court you properly. Take you to dinner, take you riding, whatever it is you do in this town. I want to see if this thing between us is as real as it feels. Because, Lydia, I have never felt anything like this before, and I don't want to let it slip away without fighting for it." Lydia's eyes stung with unexpected tears. "I want that too," she whispered. "More than I thought I could want anything." Elias leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't want to. When his lips met hers, soft and tentative and full of promise, it felt like every locked door inside her suddenly opened. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. All the possibility, all the hope, all the fragile courage it took to reach for happiness in an uncertain world. When they pulled apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "Well," he said, a smile in his voice, "that's one more reason to make sure we both survive tonight." Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the fear, Lydia found herself laughing. "Come on," she said. "Let's finish getting ready." They worked until the sun began to sink toward the mountains, turning the clouds from gray to bronze. The town had gone quiet, an eerie silence broken only by the occasional sound of men moving into position, checking weapons, preparing for whatever the night might bring. Lydia could see Sheriff Boone moving along the street, talking to his deputies and the men who'd volunteered to help defend the town. Across from the store, 2 men took up position on a rooftop, their rifles visible in the fading light. As darkness fell, Lydia and Elias retreated to the upper floor. They ate a cold dinner of bread and cheese, not wanting to risk a fire that might give away their position. Through the windows, they could see lights in other buildings being extinguished one by one until the whole town was dark and waiting. "Tell me about your father," Elias said quietly. They were sitting with their backs against the wall between 2 windows, rifles across their laps, watching the street below. "What's he like?" Lydia smiled in the darkness. He's stubborn and practical, and he loves me more than anything in the world, even if he doesn't always say it. He taught me everything I know about running the store, about shooting, about standing up for myself. My mother died when I was young, and he could have remarried, but he said he'd rather raise me right than replace her wrong.
He sounds like a good man. He is. He's going to like you, I think. Lydia glanced at Elias. Assuming we survive to introduce you. We will. Elias said it with such certainty that Lydia almost believed it. I'm not letting anything happen to you, Lydia. Not tonight, not ever if I can help it. I can take care of myself. I know, but you don't have to, not anymore. He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. That's what I'm offering. Not to take over, not to diminish you, but to stand with you. To share the burden instead of making you carry it alone. Lydia squeezed his hand, her throat tight with emotion. I'm not used to this. To someone wanting to help without expecting me to change. Then get used to it, Elias said softly. Because I'm not going anywhere. They sat in silence for a while, hands joined, watching and waiting. The night deepened, stars appearing through breaks in the clouds. Somewhere a dog barked, and somewhere else a baby cried before being quickly hushed. The whole town was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Around 10 o'clock, Lydia's eyes were starting to drift closed despite her determination to stay alert. The adrenaline of the afternoon had worn off, leaving her exhausted and fighting sleep. Beside her, Elias shifted. Why don't you rest for a bit, he suggested. I'll keep watch. I'm fine. Lydia. His voice was gentle but firm. If something happens, I need you sharp. That means resting while you can. I'll wake you if anything changes. She wanted to argue, but she could barely keep her eyes open. Just an hour, she murmured. Just an hour, Elias agreed. Lydia let her head rest against his shoulder, and within minutes she was asleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of his breathing and the warmth of his presence beside her. She woke to Elias shaking her gently, his hand over her mouth to keep her quiet. Lydia, he whispered urgently. They're here. Sleep vanished instantly. Lydia came fully awake, her heart pounding, and carefully looked out the window. The street below was dark, but movement caught her eye. Shadows detaching from other shadows. Men on horseback moving slowly, deliberately, trying to stay quiet. As her eyes adjusted, she counted 5 riders, all armed, all moving with the practiced caution of men who'd done this before. The Barlow gang. They split up as they reached the center of town. 2 headed toward the bank, 1 toward the saloon, and 2, Lydia's blood ran cold, turned toward the general store. In the faint starlight, she could see their faces, hard and cold and hungry. These were men who took what they wanted and left destruction in their wake. Beside her, Elias raised his rifle slowly, carefully. The one on the left is Roy Barlow, he breathed, barely audible. Recognize him from the wanted poster. Lydia nodded, her own rifle coming up. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. This was what her father had trained her for, not just shooting tin cans off a fence, but being ready when it truly mattered, when lives were on the line. The 2 men dismounted in front of the store. One tied the horses while the other approached the door trying the handle. Finding it locked, he stepped back and looked up at the windows. For a heart-stopping moment, Lydia thought he was looking directly at her, but then he turned to his partner and said something too quiet to hear. Then the first shot rang out from the direction of the bank, shattering the night silence like broken glass. All hell broke loose. The outlaws at the store spun toward the sound, and one of them, Roy Barlow, shouted something and pulled his gun. More shots erupted from multiple directions as the sheriff's men opened fire. The quiet street exploded into chaos, men shouting, horses screaming, the sharp crack of rifles cutting through the darkness. One of the outlaws at the store fired toward the rooftop across the street, and Lydia saw one of the defenders fall back. Without thinking, she raised her Winchester and fired, the recoil familiar against her shoulder. The outlaw staggered, clutching his arm, and his partner whirled toward the store. "Inside!" Roy Barlow shouted. "Get inside now!" They rushed the door, and Lydia heard the wood splinter as they threw their weight against it. Once, twice, and on the 3rd try, the lock gave way with a sharp crack. The 2 men burst into the store, and Elias was already moving, heading for the stairs. "Stay up here," he commanded. "Cover me from above. I'll keep them from coming up." Elias,
Trust me." He met her eyes for just a moment, and in that look was everything they hadn't had time to say. Then he was gone, disappearing down the stairs with his rifle raised. Lydia moved to the window overlooking the store's interior. She could see the two outlaws below, could hear them cursing as they searched for the safe. One of them started throwing things off shelves, smashing jars and scattering goods, while Roy Barlow headed toward the back room where her father kept the cash box. "We know you're here." Roy Barlow's voice was rough, mean. "Come out nice and easy and maybe we'll let you live." Elias appeared in the doorway to the back room, his rifle leveled. "Get out of this store, now!" Roy Barlow spun, his gun coming up, and fired. The shot went wide, punching through a display of canned goods, and Elias returned fire. The noise in the enclosed space was deafening, and smoke began to fill the air. Lydia saw the second outlaw. She thought his name was Jack, Roy's brother, circle around, trying to flank Elias. She didn't hesitate. Her Winchester barked once, and Jack Barlow's hat flew off his head. He dove for cover behind a barrel, and when he came up shooting, Lydia fired again. This time her bullet hit wood inches from his face, and he scrambled backward. "There's someone upstairs," he shouted to his brother. "I don't care if there's an army upstairs." Roy Barlow was reloading, his movements fast and practiced. "Kill them both and find that safe." The gunfight intensified. Lydia and Elias worked together without words, their movements synchronized by pure instinct. When one of them reloaded, the other kept shooting. When one drew fire, the other took the shot. It was brutal and terrifying, and there was no time to think, only to act. A bullet punched through the floor near Lydia's position, and she rolled away, her heart hammering. Below, she could hear the outlaws shouting, could smell gunpowder and fear and desperation. Glass shattered as someone shot out the front window. More shots came from outside. The sheriff's men, trying to help. But they couldn't get a clear shot without risking hitting Lydia or Elias. Roy Barlow made a run for the stairs, and Elias stepped out to block him. They traded shots at close range, so close Lydia didn't see how both men could miss, but they did. Then Elias swung his rifle like a club, catching Roy across the jaw and sending him stumbling backward into a shelf. The whole thing collapsed in a crash of wood and goods. "Roy!" Jack Barlow screamed and fired wildly. One shot caught Elias in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, and Lydia heard herself scream his name. She was moving before she knew it, racing down the stairs with her Winchester in her hands and fury in her heart. Jack Barlow turned toward her, his gun coming up, and she fired from the hip. The shot took him in the chest, and he went down without a sound. Roy Barlow was struggling to his feet, blood streaming from his nose where Elias had hit him. He saw Lydia and raised his gun, and for a frozen instant they stared at each other across the wreckage of the store. His finger tightened on the trigger. The shot came from the doorway, and Roy Barlow jerked and fell. Sheriff Boone stood there, his rifle smoking, his face grim. "Stay down!" he shouted, but the fight was already over. The gunfire outside had stopped, leaving only the ringing silence and the smell of smoke. Lydia dropped to her knees beside Elias. He was conscious, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "I'm okay," he gasped. "Just grazed me. Lydia, are you?" "I'm fine." Her hands were shaking as she pressed her handkerchief against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "You're hurt." "I'll live." He managed a pained grin. "Can't get rid of me that easy." Sheriff Boone and Deputy Reeves were checking the bodies. Jack Barlow was dead, and Roy Barlow was unconscious but breathing. Outside, they could hear more shouting, more movement. The rest of the gang had either fled or been captured. "You two all right?" Boone asked, kneeling beside them. "We will be." Lydia helped Elias sit up, still holding pressure on his shoulder. "What about the rest of the town?" "One of my deputies took a bullet in the leg, but he'll recover. We got 2 of the gang outside the bank, 1 dead, 1 wounded. The 5th one took off running when the shooting started. We'll catch him." Boone looked around at the destroyed store, his expression weary. "Your father's going to have a fit when he sees this." "My father's going to be grateful we're alive." Lydia met his eyes. "Thank you, Sheriff, for everything." Boone nodded and stood. "Doc Miller's setting up at the hotel to treat the wounded. Get Carter over there. And Lydia?" He paused at the door. "You did good tonight, real good." Then he was gone, and Lydia and Elias were alone in the ruins of the store. Around them lay shattered glass, splintered wood, scattered goods, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. But they were alive, together. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. "Remind me," Elias said hoarsely, his good hand finding hers, "never to doubt you, Miss Monroe." Lydia laughed, a sound caught somewhere between relief and tears. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's get you to the doctor." As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, washing away the darkness and revealing the full extent of the night's damage, Lydia helped Elias to his feet. They walked out together into the new day, and whatever came next, she knew they would face it the same way they'd faced the Barlow gang, side by side, equals, partners, together. The walk to the hotel felt longer than it should have, every step reminding Lydia of how close they'd come to not making it at all. Elias leaned on her more heavily than he wanted to admit, his face pale in the growing dawn light, but he kept his feet moving and didn't complain. Blood had soaked through the handkerchief she'd pressed to his shoulder, and she could feel the warmth of it seeping into her own sleeve where she supported him. The street was coming alive with people emerging from their hiding places, faces shocked and pale as they surveyed the damage. Bullet holes pocked the front of the bank. The saloon's window was shattered. A horse lay dead in the middle of the street, and someone had already covered it with a blanket. Men were carrying bodies, the outlaws who hadn't survived, toward the undertakers, and the sight made Lydia's stomach turn, even though she'd been the one to pull the trigger on Jack Barlow. She'd killed a man. The thought kept circling through her mind like a bird she couldn't shoo away. She'd aimed and fired and watched him fall, and even though it had been him or Elias, even though she'd had no choice, the weight of it settled on her shoulders like stones. "Don't," Elias said quietly, reading her expression with an accuracy that should have surprised her, but didn't. "Don't carry that. You did what you had to do." "I know." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, but knowing doesn't make it lighter. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But you're alive, and I'm alive. And that man would have killed us both without a second thought. Remember that when the weight gets too heavy." They reached the hotel just as Doc Miller was setting up his makeshift surgery in the dining room. The doctor was a thin man in his 60s with steady hands and kind eyes, and he took one look at Elias and pointed to a chair. "Sit. Let me see it." Lydia helped Elias into the chair and stepped back, suddenly aware of how she must look, dress torn, hair coming loose from its pins, blood on her hands and clothes. Doc Miller worked quickly, cutting away Elias's shirt to expose the wound. The bullet had torn through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone, but leaving a ragged furrow that was still bleeding freely. "You're lucky," the doctor said, probing gently. "Another few inches to the right, and this would have been a lot worse. As it is, you'll heal up fine if you keep it clean and don't do anything stupid." "Define stupid," Elias said through gritted teeth. "Riding a cattle drive for the next month." Doc Miller began cleaning the wound with whiskey, and Elias hissed in pain. "This needs rest, not 12 hours a day in the saddle. The cattle need to get to Cheyenne. Then they'll get there without you." The doctor's voice was firm. "I'm serious, son. You push this too hard and it'll get infected, and then you'll lose the arm or worse. Give it 2 weeks minimum before you even think about heavy work." Elias looked at Lydia, something complicated passing across his face. 2 weeks, he repeated slowly. "At least." Doc Miller was stitching now, his needle moving with practiced precision. "Miss Monroe, you look like you could use some attention yourself. Are you hurt?" Lydia looked down at herself and realized her hands were shaking. "No, I don't think so. The blood's not mine." "Shock then. Sit down before you fall down." The doctor nodded toward another chair. "Someone get this girl some water and a blanket." Mrs. Chen appeared from somewhere with both, wrapping the blanket around Lydia's shoulders and pressing a tin cup into her hands. The water was cool and sweet, and Lydia drank it gratefully, not realizing how thirsty she was until the liquid touched her tongue. Her hands were still shaking, making the cup rattle against her teeth. "It's normal," Mrs. Chen said quietly, her accent thick but her words clear. "The body fights, then the body shakes. Give it time." Around them, the hotel dining room was filling up with the wounded and the worried.
Deputy Reeves came in with his leg bandaged, limping but determined to help. The two men who'd been on the rooftop across from the store were there too. One with a graze across his ribs, the other unharmed but shaken. Sheriff Boone moved through the chaos like a man used to managing disaster, checking on his people and coordinating the cleanup. When Doc Miller finished with Elias, binding his shoulder in clean white bandages, the cowboy stood carefully and moved to sit beside Lydia. His face was still pale, but his eyes were clear and focused on her. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." It was automatic, the response she'd been giving for years whenever anyone asked. But Elias just looked at her, patient and knowing, until she sighed. "I don't know. I killed a man, Elias. I keep seeing his face when he fell." "I know." He took her hand, mindless of the blood still on her fingers. "It doesn't get easier, but it does get more distant, like a bad dream that fades with time." "You've done this before." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Twice. Once when raiders attacked a camp I was working, and once when a rustler pulled a gun on my trail boss. Both times I had no choice, and both times I spent the next week wishing I'd found another way." He squeezed her hand gently. "But here's what I learned. You can carry regret, or you can carry gratitude. Regret that you had to do it, or gratitude that you survived to see another day. Eventually, you have to choose which one weighs less." Lydia leaned her head against his good shoulder, too tired to worry about propriety or what anyone might think. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just old enough to have made most of the mistakes already." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Though sticking around this town might be the smartest decision I've made in years." "You heard what Doc Miller said. 2 weeks minimum." "I did." Elias was quiet for a moment. "My trail boss won't hold my place that long. He'll have to hire someone else to finish the drive." "I'm sorry." And she was, even though a selfish part of her was glad he wouldn't be leaving. "I know you needed that work. I'll find other work." He said it with such easy certainty that Lydia lifted her head to look at him. "Your town needs a deputy, doesn't it? I saw Sheriff Boone earlier, and he mentioned he's been short-handed for months. Figure I could do that job as well as anyone." Lydia's heart kicked against her ribs. "You'd stay for a deputy's job?" "I'd stay because I want to stay. The job's just an excuse." Elias met her eyes, and there was something so open and honest in his expression that it made her chest ache. "I meant what I said last night, Lydia. I want to see where this goes, and I can't do that from Cheyenne." Before she could respond, Sheriff Boone approached them, looking more tired than Lydia had ever seen him. His face was drawn with exhaustion, and there was blood spattered across his vest. "Miss Monroe, Carter, glad to see you both upright." "What's the final count?" Elias asked. 3 of the gang dead, including Jack Barlow. Roy Barlow's in a cell nursing a concussion and a broken nose. The 5th man, fellow named Pete Hoskins, got away, but we'll catch him eventually. Boone rubbed his face. "On our side, Deputy Reeves took a bullet in the leg, but he'll recover. Tom Henderson at the bank got grazed across the scalp. And there's property damage all over town. Worst of it at your store, Lydia." "I know." She'd been trying not to think about that, about what her father would say when he returned to find his business in ruins. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that you won't be opening for business anytime soon. Windows smashed, shelves destroyed, inventory scattered or shot up." Boone's expression softened. "But you're alive, and that's what matters." "Your father would say the same." "I hope so." Lydia stood, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "I should go back, start cleaning up." "Not yet, you won't." Doc Miller appeared beside them, his hands still bloody from treating wounds. "You need rest, young lady, real rest, not the kind where you work yourself into exhaustion pretending you're fine." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can." Mrs. Chen was there too, her small hand firm on Lydia's arm. "You come stay at my house today. Sleep, eat, recover. The store will still be there tomorrow." Lydia wanted to argue, but she was so tired her bones ached with it. The adrenaline that had kept her going through the night had drained away, leaving nothing but exhaustion and the shakes that wouldn't quite stop. "All right," she said finally, "just for today." "Good girl." Mrs. Chen looked at Elias. "You too, Cowboy. You need rest more than anyone." "I'll find somewhere," Elias started, but Sheriff Boone cut him off.
You'll stay at the hotel, on the town's coin. You help defend Sage Creek and we take care of our own. He paused. Speaking of which, I meant what I said earlier. I could use a deputy, and you've proven yourself 10 times over. Position pays $40 a month plus room and board. It's not fancy, but it's steady work if you want it. Elias glanced at Lydia, and she saw the question in his eyes. She nodded, just slightly, and something in him settled. I'll take it, Sheriff. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. There's paperwork. Baboon was smiling, the first real smile Lydia had seen from him all night. Welcome to Sage Creek, Deputy Carter. Try not to get shot again in your first week. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of night, Lydia let Mrs. Chen lead her out of the hotel and down the street toward the small house behind the laundry. She looked back once and saw Elias watching her, his hand raised in a small wave, and despite everything, the violence, the fear, the man she'd killed, she felt something like hope blooming warm in her chest. He was staying. He'd chosen to stay. For her. Lydia slept for 6 hours straight, dreamless and deep, and woke to find the sun well past noon and Mrs. Chen sitting beside the bed with a tray of food. Hot soup, fresh bread, and tea that smelled of ginger and something else she couldn't identify. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, and her hands were sore from gripping the Winchester so tightly, but she was alive, whole, safe. Eat, Mrs. Chen commanded, setting the tray across Lydia's lap. Then we talk. Lydia ate, discovering she was ravenous. She'd barely touched food yesterday, too nervous to eat, and now her body was demanding fuel. The soup was rich with chicken and vegetables, the bread still warm from the oven, and she cleaned her plate without meaning to. Mrs. Chen watched with satisfaction, then took the tray and settled back in her chair. You did a brave thing last night, the older woman said. A hard thing. How does your heart feel? It was such a direct question that Lydia didn't have time to formulate a polite answer. Heavy, she said honestly. Grateful. Confused. All of it at once. That is normal. You took a life to save a life. The Buddha teaches that all life is sacred, but he also teaches that we must protect those we love. Mrs. Chen folded her hands in her lap. You protected the cowboy. You protected yourself. You protected this town. That is not a small thing. I keep thinking about his family, Jack Barlow's. He must have had someone who loved him once, maybe still does. Perhaps. But he chose his path, and his path led him to your store in the middle of the night with a gun in his hand. You did not make that choice for him. Mrs. Chen leaned forward. Listen to me, Lydia Monroe. You can carry grief for the necessity of what you did. That shows you have a good heart. But do not carry guilt for surviving. That serves no one. Lydia nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Thank you for letting me stay here, for the food and the words and all of it. You're a good girl who has been alone too long, Mrs. Chen smiled. But I think perhaps not so alone anymore, yes? The cowboy, he looks at you like you are the sunrise after a long night. Heat rose in Lydia's cheeks. We barely know each other. Sometimes the heart knows before the head catches up. My husband, he asked to marry me 3 days after we met. I said yes, and we had 42 years together before he died. Mrs. Chen stood, gathering the tray. Rest more if you can. When you are ready, the cowboy is at the hotel asking after you every hour. Go see him. Let him see you are well. The heart heals faster when it is not worried. After Mrs. Chen left, Lydia lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Everything had changed in the space of 2 days. The store was destroyed, her quiet life disrupted, and a man she barely knew had stepped into her world and rearranged everything just by being in it. She should be terrified. She should be cautious. She should be protecting herself against the possibility of heartbreak. But all she wanted was to see Elias, to make sure he was all right, to sit beside him and feel the solid reality of his presence. She got up, washed her face and hands in the basin Mrs. Chen had left, and did what she could with her hair. Her dress was ruined, blood-stained and torn beyond saving, but Mrs. Chen had laid out a simple blue dress that must have belonged to her daughter before she married and moved to San Francisco. It fit well enough, and when Lydia looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw a woman who looked tired and bruised but unbroken. She walked back through town, and everywhere she went, people stopped to speak to her. Men touched their hats and thanked her for helping defend the town. Women who'd crossed the street to avoid her just days ago now smiled and called her brave. Even Mrs. Langford stopped her outside the dry goods store, her expression complicated. "Miss Monroe," she said stiffly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about many things, and I'm woman enough to admit it. What you did last night was remarkable." "I did what anyone would have done." "No." Mrs. Langford's voice was firm. "You did what most people wouldn't have the courage to do. You stood your ground and defended what was yours, and you saved lives doing it. That rifle of yours—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "That rifle makes you exactly who you should be. I'm sorry I tried to convince you otherwise." Lydia felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Thank you, Mrs. Langford. That means more than you know." "And that young man, the cowboy, he fought beside you?" When Lydia nodded, Mrs. Langford smiled. "Then you have my blessing, if it matters. Any man who would stand with you instead of in front of you is worth keeping." By the time Lydia reached the hotel, word of her presence had spread, and a small crowd had gathered. They wanted to hear the story, wanted to know what happened inside the store, wanted to touch her like she was some kind of talisman against their own fears. It was overwhelming and exhausting, and she was grateful when Sheriff Boone appeared and cleared a path. "All right, folks, give the girl some air. She's been through enough without you all pestering her." He guided Lydia inside and up the stairs to the second floor. "Carter's in room 7. Doc Miller's orders are rest and quiet, so don't keep him up too long." "I won't. Thank you, Sheriff." "Stop thanking people and go see your cowboy." But Boone was smiling when he said it. Lydia knocked softly on the door of room 7, and Elias's voice called for her to enter. She opened the door to find him sitting up in bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged and his shirt off. The sight of him, alive, whole, looking at her with such relief, made her throat tight. "Lydia." He started to get up, but she waved him back down and crossed to sit on the edge of the bed. "Mrs. Chen said you were resting. Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Are you?" "Better now." He reached out with his good hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so familiar already that it made her heart ache. "I was worried. You looked so shaken this morning." I am, but I'm dealing with it." She covered his hand with hers. "Doc Miller says you need to rest." "I've been resting for hours. I'm going crazy just sitting here." He shifted, wincing slightly. "How bad is the store?" "I haven't been back yet. Sheriff says it's pretty destroyed." Lydia tried to keep her voice steady. "My father's going to be devastated." "Your father's going to be grateful you're alive. Everything else can be fixed or replaced." Elias studied her face. "When does he get back?" "He said another week, but I'm going to send a telegram today asking him to come home sooner. He needs to know what happened." "And what are you going to tell him about me?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with everything unspoken. Lydia looked at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like a storm, who'd stayed when he could have left, who'd fought beside her and taken a bullet and still looked at her like she was something precious. She thought about all the years she'd spent alone, telling herself she didn't need anyone, that independence was the same as freedom. But freedom, she was learning, wasn't about being alone. It was about having the choice not to be. "I'm going to tell him the truth," she said quietly, "that I met a man who sees me for who I am, who stood with me when things got dangerous, who makes me want things I didn't think I could have." She paused, gathering courage. "Who I'm falling in love with, even though it's fast and reckless and probably foolish." Elias's breath caught. "Lydia, I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. I know all the reasonable, sensible arguments against this." She met his eyes. "But I also know that when you walked into my store 2 days ago, something in me recognized something in you. And when you said you'd stay, when you chose to stand with me instead of riding away to safety, I knew I'd never met anyone like you before and probably never would again." "You're not foolish," Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're brave, braver than anyone I've ever met. And for what it's worth, I'm falling in love with you too. Fell, maybe. Past tense. The moment I saw you shooting those cans off the fence, looking so fierce and certain and completely yourself." He pulled her closer with his good arm. "I've been drifting my whole adult life, Lydia. Always moving, never settling, telling myself I was free when really I was just lost. But then I found you, and suddenly I knew exactly where I was supposed to be." Lydia leaned in and kissed him, soft and slow and full of promise. This kiss was different from the first, less urgent, more certain, a claim and a covenant all at once. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his and smiled. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we figure it out together." Elias stroked her hair gently. "I'll take the deputy job and learn the work. You'll rebuild the store with your father. We'll court properly, give the town something to talk about besides outlaws. And when enough time has passed that it's respectable, I'll ask your father for permission to marry you. And if he says no, then I'll ask you anyway." He grinned. "Though something tells me your father's going to like me just fine." "He will." Lydia kissed him again, quick and sweet. "But right now you need to rest. Doctor's orders. Will you stay?" "For a while." She settled beside him on the bed, careful of his injured shoulder. "Just until you fall asleep." "I'm not tired." "You're exhausted. Close your eyes." Elias grumbled but obeyed, and within minutes his breathing had deepened into sleep. Lydia stayed beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, letting herself feel the simple miracle of their survival. Outside, the town was cleaning up, repairing damage, returning to normal. And here, in this quiet room, two people who'd been alone too long had found each other in the chaos and chosen to stay. But the afternoon stretched into evening, and Lydia finally forced herself to leave the hotel and face the store. She'd been putting it off, not wanting to see the damage, but it had to be done. As she walked down the street, the sun was sinking toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The beauty of it seemed wrong somehow, too peaceful for a day that had started with gunfire and death. The store looked worse in daylight than it had in darkness. The front window was completely shattered, glass littering the boardwalk. The door hung crooked on its hinges, the lock mechanism destroyed. Inside, the destruction was total. Shelves overturned, goods scattered and ruined, bullet holes in the walls and ceiling. The floor was stained with blood, and the acrid smell of gunpowder still hung in the air. Lydia stood in the doorway and felt tears threaten. This was her father's dream, his life's work, and she'd let it be destroyed. Never mind that there'd been no choice, that she'd done what she had to do. The result was the same. The store was ruined, and it was her responsibility. "It looks worse than it is." She turned to find Tommy Haskins standing behind her, his hat in his hands and his expression sheepish. Two other young men stood with him, Pete and another boy she didn't know well, all of them looking uncomfortable. "Tommy," she didn't know what else to say. "I came to apologize for what I said the other day, and for—" He gestured helplessly at the store. "For all of it, I guess. I was a jackass, and you didn't deserve that." "No, I didn't." "Right." Tommy shuffled his feet. "Anyway, we came to help. Figured the least we could do is clean up the mess, if you'll let us." Lydia looked at the three of them, these boys who'd mocked her and dismissed her and generally made her life harder than it needed to be. But they were here now, offering help when she needed it, and that counted for something. "I'd appreciate that," she said. "Thank you." They worked until dark, clearing out the broken shelves, sweeping up glass, sorting through inventory to see what could be salvaged. More people came to help. The widow Peterson with her daughters, Mr. Chen from the laundry, even Mrs. Langford with her daughter-in-law Catherine. They brought brooms and hammers, bandages and sympathy, and slowly the chaos began to resolve into something manageable. By the time full darkness fell, the store was far from fixed, but at least it was clear. The damaged goods had been sorted, the glass swept up, the worst of the blood scrubbed from the floorboards. Lydia stood in the middle of it all, exhausted but grateful, as her neighbors filed out one by one with promises to return tomorrow. "You're not alone in this," the widow Peterson said, squeezing Lydia's hand. "We take care of our own in Sage Creek, and you're one of us whether you knew it or not." After everyone left, Lydia walked through the store one more time, taking inventory of the damage by lamplight. So much would need to be replaced: windows, shelving, stock. The safe had survived intact, thank God, but it would take weeks of work and most of their savings to get the store operational again. She was making notes when she heard footsteps on the porch. Her hand moved instinctively toward the Winchester before she recognized Sheriff Boone's silhouette in the doorway. "Working late?" he asked. "Couldn't sleep anyway. Figured I might as well be productive." Lydia set down her pencil. "Did you catch the fifth outlaw?" "Not yet, but we will. Man like that, he's got no friends and nowhere to run. He'll make a mistake eventually." Boone stepped inside, looking around at the damage. "You did good work today, getting folks organized, cleaning up. Your father would be proud." "I hope so." Lydia's voice wavered despite her best efforts. "I keep thinking about what he'll say when he sees this. All his work, destroyed in one night."
He'll say what any father would say, that he's grateful his daughter is alive and everything else is just wood and nails. Boone pulled something from his pocket and held it out. "Found this in the street this morning. Thought you might want it." It was one of the tin cans from her fence, dented and scraped but still recognizable. Lydia took it, turning it over in her hands, and felt tears finally spill over. This stupid tin can, this remnant of a morning that felt like a lifetime ago, when Elias had first ridden by and everything had changed. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." Boone cleared his throat, uncomfortable with emotion. "Listen, Lydia, what you did last night, what you and Carter both did, that took real courage, the kind most people never have to find. You saved lives, including your own, and you did it without hesitating. That's the mark of true character. I was terrified the whole time. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." He paused. "Carter's a good man. If things go the way I think they will, you'll have a good life together." Lydia smiled through her tears. "Is everyone in this town discussing my romantic prospects?" "It's a small town. We don't have much else to talk about." But Boone was grinning. "Get some rest, Lydia. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." After he left, Lydia locked up what was left of the store and climbed the stairs to the living quarters. The rooms above had escaped the worst of the damage, though everything was dusty and disheveled from her frantic preparations yesterday. She washed her face and hands, changed into a nightgown, and sat by the window looking out at the town. Sage Creek was dark and quiet, settling into sleep after the trauma of the night before. Somewhere out there, Elias was sleeping in his hotel room, healing. Somewhere out there, her father was probably reading her telegram and preparing to come home. And somewhere out there, the future was waiting. Uncertain, yes, but also full of possibility. Lydia set the dented tin can on the windowsill, a reminder of how quickly everything could change. 2 days ago, she'd been alone and resigned to staying that way. Now she had Elias, had the beginning of something that felt real and true and worth fighting for. Now she had a town that had finally seen her for who she was and accepted it. Now she had hope. She climbed into bed with the Winchester leaning against the nightstand. Some habits were too ingrained to break, and let herself drift towards sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new complications. But tonight, she was safe. She was loved, and she was finally, beautifully, no longer alone. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Lydia sent her telegram to Denver, explaining the situation in the briefest terms possible and asking her father to come home. She received a reply within hours. Arriving Tuesday. Stop. Don't worry. Stop. Love, Dad. That gave her 4 days to make the store look as presentable as possible and to figure out how to explain everything that had happened. Elias recovered quickly, his youth and general fitness working in his favor. By Saturday, he was up and moving around, though Doc Miller had strictly forbidden any heavy work. He spent his time at the sheriff's office learning the routines and procedures of his new job, studying maps of the territory and wanted posters of known criminals. Sheriff Boone seemed pleased with his new deputy, often commenting that it was nice to have someone who could actually shoot straight and didn't run at the first sign of trouble. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, Elias would come to the store and help Lydia with the lighter tasks, sorting inventory, updating the ledger, planning what needed to be ordered to replace the lost stock. They worked side by side, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Sometimes they'd take walks through town as the sun set, and Lydia would feel the weight of curious eyes following them, the whispers and speculation. But instead of bothering her, it felt like acceptance, like she was finally part of the community instead of just existing at its edges. On Sunday, they went to church together. Lydia hadn't been to services in months. She'd grown tired of the judgmental looks and whispered criticisms, but Elias asked if she'd go with him, and she found she couldn't refuse. They sat in the back pew, and Lydia was acutely aware of every head that turned, every whisper that passed between neighbors. But when Pastor Williams began his sermon, he spoke about courage and sacrifice, about standing firm in the face of evil, and his eyes kept finding Lydia and Elias in the congregation. After the service, people crowded around them. Young girls asked Lydia to teach them to shoot. Mothers thanked her for keeping the town safe. Men shook Elias's hand and welcomed him as the new deputy. It was overwhelming and wonderful and strange, this sudden acceptance after years of being on the outside looking in. Mrs. Langford approached as the crowd was dispersing, and Lydia braced herself for criticism. But the older woman simply smiled. "I'm hosting a dinner next Saturday evening. Small gathering, just a few families. I'd be honored if you and Deputy Carter would attend." Lydia nearly dropped her Bible. Mrs. Langford, inviting her to a social event. Mrs. Langford, treating her like a respectable member of society. "We'd be delighted," she managed. "Thank you." As they walked back toward the store, Elias chuckled. "I think you just got the town's official seal of approval." "It's surreal. A week ago, half these people wouldn't give me the time of day. A week ago, they hadn't seen who you really are. Sometimes people need a crisis to shake them out of their prejudices." He slipped his hand into hers, the gesture natural and easy. "Though, if I'm honest, I'm glad it happened. Otherwise, I might have ridden through this town and never stopped, and I would have missed out on the best thing that's ever happened to me." Lydia squeezed his hand. "Even getting shot? Even that. Worth it." He pulled her to a stop in the middle of the street and turned to face her. "Lydia, I know we're doing this backward, falling in love before courting, getting engaged before marriage, but I want you to know something. When your father gets back, when things settle down, I'm going to ask him for his blessing, and then I'm going to ask you to marry me, properly, with a ring and everything." Her heart felt too big for her chest. "And what if I say no?" "You won't." He said it with such confidence that she had to laugh. "But if you do, I'll ask again, and again, until you get tired of saying no and say yes just to shut me up." "That's not very romantic." "I'll work on it." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of Main Street with half the town probably watching, and Lydia kissed him back without caring who saw. Let them talk. Let them whisper. She'd spent too many years caring what people thought, and she was done with it. When they pulled apart, she saw Tommy Haskins watching from across the street, his expression complicated. He raised his hand in a tentative wave, and Lydia waved back. Some wounds would take time to heal, some relationships would never be what they might have been. But that was all right. She was learning that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It just meant choosing not to let the past poison the future. Monday morning brought more work on the store. A carpenter came to measure for new windows and shelving. A freight company representative took Lydia's order for replacement stock. The bank manager stopped by to assure her that credit was available if she needed it. The town wanted Monroe's General Store to reopen as soon as possible, and they'd help make it happen. The generosity was overwhelming, and more than once Lydia had to step outside to compose herself before tears of gratitude could fall. Monday evening, Elias finished his shift at the sheriff's office and came to help Lydia paint over the bullet holes in the walls. They worked in comfortable silence, brushes moving in steady strokes, covering the scars of violence with fresh white paint. It was symbolic somehow, this act of restoration, taking something broken and making it whole again. "Tell me about your family," Lydia said, breaking the silence. "Your parents, siblings. I've told you all about my father, but I don't know anything about yours." Elias was quiet for a moment, his brush pausing mid-stroke. "Not much to tell. My mother died when I was 14, fever, same as yours. My father remarried a year later to a woman who made it clear she didn't want a half-grown stepson underfoot. I have 3 half-sisters I barely know. When I left at 17, my father said I was making a mistake, that I'd amount to nothing. Haven't spoken to him since."
That's terrible. Lydia set down her brush and moved to stand beside him. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important, that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people you choose, the ones who choose you back. He looked down at her, his expression soft. You're my family now, Lydia. You and this town and this life we're building. That's enough for me. She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. It's enough for me, too. They finished painting as darkness fell, then sat on the front porch sharing a simple dinner of bread and cheese and apples. The street was quiet, the town peaceful. Someone was playing a fiddle somewhere, the music drifting through the warm evening air. It felt almost normal, like the violence of Thursday night had been a nightmare they'd both awoken from. Tomorrow's Tuesday, Lydia said, leaning against Elias's good shoulder. My father will be here. Nervous? Terrified. She laughed shakily. What if he doesn't like you? What if he thinks I'm being foolish, falling for a man I've known less than a week? Then I'll prove myself to him. Elias wrapped his arm around her. However long it takes, whatever I have to do. I'm not going anywhere, Lydia. Your father's approval would be wonderful, but your happiness is what matters most. If he can't see that I'd do anything to make you happy, then I'll just have to show him. You're very sure of yourself. I'm sure of us. He kissed the top of her head. Everything else is just details. Lydia let herself relax into his embrace, listening to the fiddle music and the distant sound of voices, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone. That knowledge was worth more than all the certainty in the world. Tuesday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Colorado day that made you forget winter was coming. Lydia woke early and spent an hour making herself presentable, washing thoroughly, pinning her hair in an elaborate style she usually saved for special occasions, putting on her best remaining dress. She wanted her father to see her at her best, wanted him to know she'd managed well in his absence, despite everything that had happened. She was in the store, anxiously rearranging canned goods that didn't need rearranging, when she heard a horse outside. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she rushed to the door just as her father dismounted from a hired horse, looking travel-worn and worried. Lydia! James Monroe was a solid man in his 50s with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life working hard. He pulled his daughter into a fierce hug, and Lydia felt herself start to cry despite her best intentions. Thank God. When I got your telegram, I aged 10 years. Are you hurt? I'm fine, Papa. I promise. She pulled back so he could see her face. A little shaken, but fine. James held her at arm's length, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Then he looked past her at the store, and his expression shifted from relief to shock. Sweet Jesus. The telegram said there was damage, but this... I know. I'm sorry, Papa. I tried to protect it, but you were fighting armed outlaws, and you're lucky to be alive. James pulled her close again. The store can be rebuilt, Lydia. You can't. Don't you dare apologize for surviving. They went inside, and Lydia walked her father through everything. The warning about the Barlow gang, the preparations, the attack, the gunfight. She told him about killing Jack Barlow, about Elias getting shot, about the town coming together afterward to help clean up. James listened without interrupting, his face grave, his hands clenching and unclenching as she described the worst parts. When she finished, he sat down heavily on one of the few remaining chairs. You shot a man. I did. Lydia's voice was steady. He was going to kill Elias. I didn't have a choice. I know. James rubbed his face. I know you didn't. But God, Lydia, I never wanted that for you. I taught you to shoot so you could defend yourself, not so you'd have to live with... He broke off, looking at her with haunted eyes. Are you all right? Really? I think so. It's hard carrying that weight. But Elias has helped, and Mrs. Chen, and just knowing I did what I had to do. She knelt beside her father's chair. I'm dealing with it, Papa. I promise. This Elias, the cowboy from your telegram. Tell me about him. Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. He's the new deputy. He stayed to help defend the store when he could have ridden away with his cattle outfit. He took a bullet protecting me, and he's... She searched for the right words.
He's good, Papa. Kind and brave, and he sees me for who I am. He doesn't want to change me or make me smaller. He wants to stand with me. James studied his daughter's face, and whatever he saw there made his expression soften. You love him. I do. I know it's fast. I know it seems crazy, but your mother and I knew each other 3 weeks before I proposed. When you know, you know. He stood and pulled Lydia to her feet. I want to meet this man who's stolen my daughter's heart, today. He's at the sheriff's office. I can take you there now. They walked together through town, and Lydia felt like she was floating somewhere outside her body. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. If her father didn't approve of Elias, if he forbade the relationship, what would she do? She'd never defied her father before, never had reason to. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that she wouldn't give up Elias, not for anyone. The sheriff's office was a small building near the center of town, and through the window Lydia could see Elias at a desk, studying something intently. He looked up as they entered, and his face brightened when he saw her before turning carefully neutral when he noticed James. Papa, this is Elias Carter. Elias, my father, James Monroe. The two men sized each other up in that way men do, measuring and assessing. Then James extended his hand. Mr. Carter, I understand I owe you my daughter's life. Elias shook his hand firmly. With all due respect, sir, your daughter saved her own life, and possibly mine. I just had the privilege of standing beside her while she did it. James's eyebrows rose. That's not how she tells it. Your daughter's modest. She's also the best shot I've ever seen and brave enough to make most men look like cowards. Elias glanced at Lydia, his expression warm. You raised an extraordinary woman, Mr. Monroe. You should be proud. I am. James released his hand and stepped back. Sheriff Boone tells me you've taken the deputy position. Yes, sir. $40 a month and room and board. Not much, but it's honest work, and I'm good at it. And before this? What were you? A drifter, a cowboy. Whatever work I could find, moving from job to job and town to town. Never stayed anywhere longer than a season. Elias's voice was steady, honest. I won't lie to you, sir. I don't have money saved up or property to my name. Everything I own fits in a saddlebag. But I'm a hard worker. I don't drink to excess, and I've never shirked a responsibility in my life. James crossed his arms. My daughter says you have feelings for her. I'm in love with her, sir. Have been since the moment I saw her shooting tin cans off a fence like she was born doing it. Elias met James's eyes directly. I know it's fast. I know I'm not what you probably imagined for her. No money, no prospects beyond a deputy's salary. But I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure she's happy and safe and free to be exactly who she is. That's my promise, and I don't make promises lightly. The office was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Lydia held her breath, watching her father's face, trying to read his expression. Finally, James nodded. All right, you can court my daughter, but there are conditions. Name them. First, you do this properly. No rushing, no impropriety. You court her in public places where people can see you're behaving respectably. Second, you keep her safe. That means teaching her to protect herself even better than I did, and being there when she needs you. Third, James paused, his voice growing softer. Third, you make her happy, really happy, not just comfortable. My wife made me promise, before she died, that I'd make sure Lydia had a life full of joy. That's what I want for her. Can you do that? Elias's smile was like sunrise. Yes, sir. I can do that. I will do that. Then you have my blessing. For now. James looked between them. But understand, Mr. Carter, you hurt my daughter, and deputy or not, you'll answer to me. Understood, sir. And if I ever hurt your daughter, I'll hold the gun myself. James snorted, the closest thing to a laugh Lydia had heard from him since he arrived. I think I'm going to like you, Carter. Against my better judgment, but I am. Lydia felt tears of relief streaming down her face. She'd been so afraid, so worried that her father would object, would see only the lack of money or the speed of things. But he'd seen what she'd seen, that Elias was good and true and exactly right. Thank you, Papa, she whispered. Thank me by being happy. James pulled her into a hug. Now, let's go look at the store and figure out what needs to be done to fix it. Carter,
You're invited to dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. Don't be late." "I wouldn't dream of it, sir." As they left the sheriff's office, Lydia looked back to see Elias watching her, his expression full of so much love and promise that it made her chest ache. She mouthed, "I love you," and he mouthed it back, and somehow, impossibly, everything was going to be all right. More than all right. It was going to be wonderful. The weeks that followed brought a transformation to both the store and to Lydia's life that she could hardly have imagined a month before. Her father threw himself into the repairs with the same stubborn determination that had built the business in the first place, and the whole town seemed eager to help. Carpenters worked long hours installing new windows and shelving. The freight company rushed orders through. Women brought meals so Lydia and her father wouldn't have to stop working to cook. It was as if Sage Creek had collectively decided that Monroe's General Store was more than just a business. It was a symbol of their resilience, their refusal to let outlaws dictate their future. Elias settled into his role as deputy with a natural authority that impressed even the most skeptical townspeople. He patrolled the streets with quiet confidence, broke up fights at the saloon without excessive force, and showed a talent for diffusing tense situations with words instead of violence. Sheriff Boone often remarked that hiring Elias was the best decision he'd made in years, and the older lawman seemed to relax knowing he had reliable backup. And every evening, when the day's work was done, Elias would come to the store and court Lydia properly, just as he'd promised her father. They'd sit on the porch as the sun set, talking about their days, their dreams, their plans for the future. Sometimes James would join them, telling stories about Lydia's mother or asking Elias about his time on the trail. Other times, he'd tactfully busy himself upstairs, giving them privacy while still being close enough to maintain propriety. On their first real date, Elias took Lydia to Mrs. Chen's cafe again, and this time the meal felt different, more official, more public. Half the town seemed to find excuses to walk past the window, and Mrs. Chen kept bringing them extra food with a knowing smile. Lydia felt self-conscious at first, aware of all those watching eyes, but Elias just laughed and said, "Let them look. I'm proud to be seen with you." The following Saturday, they attended Mrs. Langford's dinner party, and Lydia wore a dress her father had bought her in Denver, deep green silk that made her eyes look even darker. Elias wore his best shirt and pants, his hair freshly cut, and when he offered her his arm to walk to the Langford house, Lydia felt like they were playing at being respectable adults. But it wasn't playing, she realized. This was real life, the life they were building together. The dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Mrs. Langford seated them near the head of the table as guests of honor, and the conversation ranged from town business to national politics to the upcoming harvest. Catherine Langford, Mrs. Langford's daughter-in-law, asked Lydia shyly if she'd really meant it about teaching young women to shoot, and when Lydia said yes, 3 other women immediately expressed interest. By the time dessert was served, apple pie with fresh cream, Lydia had agreed to hold shooting lessons every Sunday afternoon after church. "You're going to be busy," Elias observed as they walked home under a sky full of stars. "Running the store, giving lessons, putting up with me." "I like busy." Lydia squeezed his arm. "And putting up with you is the easiest part." Liar, but he was smiling. "Your father seems to be warming to me." "He likes you. He told me so yesterday while you were on patrol. Said you remind him of himself at that age, determined and honest and not afraid of hard work." She paused. "He also said he thinks you'll make me happy, which is all he's ever wanted for me." Elias stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "I will make you happy, Lydia. That's not just a promise to your father, it's a promise to you. Whatever it takes, however long I live, I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "You already do." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "Just by being you. Just by seeing me as I am and not wanting to change anything." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of longing, and Lydia felt heat bloom through her body. They were standing in the middle of the street where anyone could see, but she didn't care. Let the whole town watch. Let them talk. She was done hiding, done pretending to be smaller than she was. This was who she'd become. A woman who'd faced down outlaws and won, who'd found love in the chaos, who wasn't afraid anymore. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. We should get you home before your father comes looking for us with a shotgun. He trusts you. I know. But I also know what it's like to love someone and want to protect them. If I were him, I'd be watching us like a hawk. Elias stepped back, taking her hand instead. Come on, let's get you home and I'll come by tomorrow after church for those shooting lessons you promised. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, hands linked, shoulders brushing. When they reached the store, Elias kissed her goodnight on the porch, chaste and brief, appropriate for courting, and waited until she was safely inside before heading back to the room he rented above the feed store. Through the window, Lydia watched him go, this man who'd appeared in her life like a miracle and stayed like a promise. Upstairs, her father was reading by lamplight, and he looked up as she entered. Good evening. Wonderful evening. Lydia couldn't keep the smile off her face. Mrs. Langford was actually pleasant, and I've agreed to teach shooting lessons starting next week. Your mother would have loved that. James set down his book. She always said women should know how to protect themselves, that dependence was just another kind of cage. She'd be proud of you, Lydia, proud of the woman you've become. Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes. I wish she could have met Elias. She'd have liked him. Hell, she'd have probably encouraged this whole thing from the start. Your mother never had much patience for convention. James stood and crossed to his daughter, pulling her into a hug. Are you happy, sweetheart? Really happy? More than I ever thought I could be. She pulled back to look at him. Is that strange? A month ago, my life was completely different. And now you've found someone who makes you want to build a future instead of just surviving the present. That's not strange, Lydia. That's grace. He kissed her forehead. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Lydia lay in bed thinking about everything that had changed, everything that was still changing. The store would reopen in another week. They'd worked miracles getting it ready, and life would return to some version of normal. But it would be a new normal, one that included Elias and shooting lessons and the tentative acceptance of a town that had finally stopped seeing her as a scandal and started seeing her as one of their own. She thought about the future, about what it might hold. Marriage, almost certainly, though they hadn't spoken of timing yet. Children, maybe, though the thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. A life built side by side with someone who understood her, who valued her strength instead of being threatened by it. It was more than she dared to dream. The next morning, church services were packed, and Lydia found herself the center of attention once again. Young women clustered around her after the service, eager to know when the shooting lessons would start and what they needed to bring. Lydia promised to have everything organized by next Sunday, and she saw pride in Elias's eyes as he watched her handle the crowd with easy confidence. That afternoon, she and Elias rode out to a spot north of town where they could practice shooting without disturbing anyone. They'd borrowed horses from the livery, and the ride itself was glorious. Warm sun, clear sky, the mountains rising purple and magnificent in the distance. Elias rode easy, his shoulder having healed well enough that Doc Miller had finally cleared him for full duty. They set up tin cans on a fallen log and took turns shooting, and Lydia was pleased to discover that Elias was nearly as good a shot as she was. They traded tips and techniques, laughing when they missed and cheering when they hit, and it felt less like practice and more like play. Like two people who'd found joy in each other's company and didn't need any excuse beyond that. You're going to be a good teacher, Elias said, watching Lydia reload with practiced efficiency. Patient, knowledgeable, encouraging. Those women are lucky to have you. I hope I can actually help them. Shooting's not just about pulling a trigger. It's about confidence, about believing you can protect yourself. She raised the Winchester and fired, and another can went flying. My father gave me that when he taught me, the belief that I could handle whatever came. And you did. You handled the Barlow gang, you're handling the store repairs, you're handling this whole courtship thing with me. Elias moved behind her and adjusted her stance slightly, his hands on her waist. Though I have to say, some parts of courting you are more difficult than others. What do you mean? Lydia looked back at him, confused, and saw heat in his eyes that made her breath catch. I mean, it's hard to be proper and respectful when what I really want is to kiss you until neither of us can think straight. His voice was low, rough. I want to court you right, Lydia.
Want to do this the way your father expects. But God, it's not easy. Lydia set down the Winchester carefully and turned in his arms. They were alone out here, miles from town, with nothing but sky and grass and the distant call of hawks. Then don't be proper. Not right now. Not when it's just us. Elias groaned and pulled her close, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste pecks they'd shared in town. This was hungry and desperate and full of weeks of restrained wanting. Lydia kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressed against his. She felt his heart pounding against her chest, felt his hands move from her waist to her back, holding her like she was precious and desired and everything he'd ever wanted. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers and laughed shakily. "We should stop, before I forget every promise I made to your father." "We should," Lydia agreed, but she didn't move away. "One more minute. Just let me have one more minute." So they stood there, wrapped in each other, letting the moment stretch and deepen. Finally, reluctantly, Elias stepped back and picked up his hat from where it had fallen. "Come on. We should head back before someone comes looking for us and gets the wrong idea. Or the right idea. Lydia Monroe, are you trying to scandalize me?" "Maybe a little." She was grinning as she mounted her horse. "Is it working?" Terrifyingly well. But Elias was grinning too as he swung into his saddle. "Race you back to town?" They rode hard and fast, the horses stretching out beneath them, and Lydia felt free in a way she'd never experienced before. The wind whipped her hair loose from its pins, and she laughed out loud, pure and joyful. Beside her, Elias matched her pace, and they thundered across the grassland like two people who'd forgotten every rule they'd ever learned and remembered only how to be alive. Lydia won by half a length, pulling up just outside town with her chest heaving and her face flushed. Elias arrived seconds later, shaking his head in mock defeat. "That's twice now you've bested me. I'm starting to think you're better at everything." "Not everything. You're better at cards and your handwriting's neater than mine." Damning with faint praise. He dismounted and came to help her down, his hands lingering on her waist. "Thank you for today. I needed this. Needed time with just you, away from the town and all its watching eyes." "Me too." Lydia looked up at him, this man who'd become so essential to her in such a short time. "Elias, I know we're supposed to be taking this slow courting properly, but I want you to know, I'm sure, about us, about this. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "I'm sure too." He kissed her forehead gently. "And when the time's right, when enough has passed that your father won't think I'm rushing you, I'm going to ask you to marry me, just so you know what's coming." "I'll say yes, just so you know." They smiled at each other, and in that moment, Lydia felt the future settle around them like a warm blanket, certain and safe and full of promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they'd face them together. That was enough. That was everything. The store reopened the following Monday to a crowd that stretched down the block. People came not just to buy things, but to show support, to see the repairs, to congratulate Lydia and her father on their resilience. The new windows gleamed in the morning sun, and the fresh paint smell mingled with the familiar scents of coffee and leather and dry goods. Everything was clean and organized and ready, and Lydia felt a surge of pride as she looked around at what they'd accomplished. Her father handled most of the customers that first day, insisting that Lydia should be the one to greet people at the door since she was the face everyone wanted to see. It was overwhelming and exhausting and wonderful. Townspeople she'd never spoken to before came to shake her hand and welcome her back. Children stared at her with wide eyes, clearly having heard exaggerated stories about the shootout. And more than one person made a point of saying they were proud to shop at a store run by such a brave woman. By closing time, they'd done more business than any single day in the store's history. James counted the cash with shaking hands, hardly believing the total. "We're going to be all right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Better than all right. Lydia, we're going to thrive." "We earned it." Lydia was exhausted but happy. "We fought for this, Papa. For the store, for our place in this town, for the right to exist on our own terms. We earned every bit of it. Your mother would be so proud." James pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud."
That night, Elias brought dinner from Mrs. Chen's cafe. Enough for all three of them, and they ate upstairs in the living quarters, too tired to care about formality. They talked about the successful reopening, about the plans for expansion that James was already making, about the shooting lessons Lydia would start that coming Sunday. The conversation was easy and comfortable, and Lydia realized this was what family felt like. Not just blood, but chosen. People who supported each other, who celebrated victories together, who made room at the table without question. After dinner, while James cleaned up, Elias walked Lydia out to the porch. The night was cool, autumn finally making itself felt after the long summer heat. Stars blazed overhead, and somewhere a fiddle was playing, the music drifting through the darkness. "Your father's a good man," Elias said, leaning against the porch rail. "I'm glad I got to meet him, glad he gave us his blessing." "He likes you, more than likes you. He respects you. That's harder to earn with him." Lydia joined him at the rail, their shoulders touching. "He told me yesterday that you remind him of the man he was before life made him cautious. Said you have the kind of courage that doesn't show off, just acts." "That's generous of him." Elias was quiet for a moment. "Lydia, I've been thinking. About us, about the future, about timing." Her heart rate picked up. "What about it?" "I know we agreed to take things slow, to court properly, and give the town time to adjust. And I still want to do that. I'm not suggesting we rush into anything." He turned to face her fully. "But I also know what I want, and I don't see the point in pretending otherwise. So I'm giving you fair warning. I'm going to ask your father for his blessing to propose. Soon. Maybe next week, maybe the week after. And then I'm going to ask you, with a ring and witnesses and everything proper. I just wanted you to know it's coming so you can think about your answer." Lydia's breath caught. She'd known this was coming, had even told him she'd say yes. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing the certainty in his voice, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I've already thought about my answer." "And?" "And you'll hear it when you ask properly." She was smiling, though, couldn't help it. "But Elias, just so you're not nervous, it's the answer you want." He pulled her into his arms, and they stood there wrapped in each other while the fiddle music played and the stars wheeled overhead. Lydia felt peace settle into her bones, the kind of deep contentment that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. A month ago, she'd been alone and resigned to staying that way. Now she had love, had partnership, had a future that stretched bright and endless before her. "I should go," Elias murmured eventually, "before your father comes out here and reminds me about proper courting distance." Probably wise, but Lydia didn't let go immediately. "Same time tomorrow?" "Every tomorrow," he promised, "for the rest of our lives, if you'll have me." "I will." She kissed him quickly, sweetly. "Now go, before I decide propriety is overrated." He left with obvious reluctance, and Lydia watched until he disappeared into the darkness before going back inside. Her father was sitting in his chair by the lamp, reading, and he looked up as she entered. "He's going to ask you to marry him soon," James said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Lydia sat down across from him. "Is that all right with you?" "It's more than all right. It's what I hoped for." He set down his book. "I wanted to wait until things settled before saying this, but Lydia, I see the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon and stars just for him. That's how I looked at your mother, and that's how every woman deserves to be looked at by the man she marries." "You approve then? Really approve, not just tolerating him for my sake?" "I really approve. He's a good man, Lydia. Honest, hardworking, brave. He loves you for exactly who you are, which is all I ever wanted for you." James smiled. "When he comes to ask my blessing, I'm going to give it. And then I'm going to give you my mother's ring, the one I gave your mother when I proposed, so he has something proper to offer you." Lydia felt tears well up. "Papa, that ring means everything to you. And you mean everything to me. Your mother would want you to have it, to start your marriage with something that connects you to her." He stood and pulled Lydia up, holding her close. "You're going to be happy, sweetheart. I can feel it. You're going to have the life your mother and I always dreamed you'd have." "I hope so." She pulled back to look at him. "But what about you? I'll be moving out eventually, leaving you alone here." "I've been alone before. I'll manage." He smiled.
Besides, Deputy Carter's room above the feed store isn't exactly spacious. I imagine you'll want to stay here for a while after you're married, just until you can afford something of your own. I'm not getting rid of you that easily." "You make a good point." Lydia laughed through her tears.
I hadn't thought that far ahead. Well, start thinking, because your cowboy's not going to wait much longer, and when he asks, you're going to say yes, and then we'll be planning a wedding. James kissed her forehead. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's another busy day. But Lydia lay awake long after her father's snoring started, her mind spinning with possibilities. Marriage. A home of her own, eventually. Children, maybe. A life built with Elias, full of work and love and the kind of partnership she'd only ever dreamed about. It was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure, this leap into the unknown. But she wasn't leaping alone. That made all the difference. Sunday's shooting lesson drew a crowd bigger than Lydia had expected. 10 women showed up, ranging in age from 16 to 60, all of them carrying rifles of varying quality, and all of them looking both determined and nervous. Elias came along to help, and together they set up targets behind the church where the noise wouldn't disturb anyone. Lydia started with the basics: stance, grip, sight alignment. She moved among the women, correcting posture and offering encouragement, and she found she genuinely enjoyed teaching. There was something satisfying about watching someone who'd never held a rifle before learn to shoot with confidence. The widow Peterson turned out to be a natural, hitting the target on her third try. Catherine Langford was timid at first, but grew bolder with each successful shot. Even Mrs. Langford showed up to watch, and though she didn't pick up a rifle herself, she looked approving. "You're good at this," Elias observed during a break while the women were reloading. "Patient but firm. They respect you." "I hope so. I want them to feel capable, not just go through the motions." Lydia watched her students, feeling proud of their progress. Every woman should know she can protect herself, that she doesn't have to wait for a man to save her. "Though it's nice when you have backup," Elias added with a grin. "Professional opinion as your backup." "Professional opinion noted." She bumped his shoulder with hers. "Thank you for helping. I couldn't have managed this many women alone." "Happy to help. Besides, watching you teach is attractive. Very schoolmarm with a dangerous side." Lydia snorted. "That's not a thing." "It is now. I'm making it a thing." They taught for another hour, and by the end, every woman had hit the target at least once. Faces that had been nervous at the start were now glowing with confidence and accomplishment. As they packed up, several women asked when the next lesson would be, and Lydia promised to make it a regular Sunday event. The sense of community, of women supporting each other and learning practical skills, felt revolutionary in a town that had always emphasized domestic duties over self-reliance. Walking back through town afterward, Lydia felt someone watching them. She turned to see Tommy Haskins standing outside the feed store, his expression complicated. He'd been keeping his distance since the night of the shootout, and their few interactions had been awkward but civil. Now he approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "Miss Monroe?" "Carter." He nodded to them both. "I heard about the shooting lessons. That's a good thing you're doing, teaching women to defend themselves." "Thank you, Tommy." Lydia was cautious, unsure where this was going. "I wanted to apologize. Again, I've apologized for what I said, but I never apologized for why I said it." Tommy looked uncomfortable, but determined. "I was jealous. You were always so sure of yourself, so confident, and you never needed anyone's approval. I wanted you to need mine, I guess. And when you didn't, when you chose Carter here, I got mean about it. That wasn't right." "No, it wasn't." Elias's voice was level. "But it takes courage to admit that." "Yeah, well," Tommy shrugged. "I've been thinking a lot since that night. About what matters, about the kind of man I want to be. Watching you two fight off those outlaws while I was hiding in the church with the women and children, that was humbling. Made me realize I've got a lot of growing up to do." "We all do," Lydia said gently. "Thank you for saying that, Tommy. It means something." "You're welcome." He tipped his hat and walked away, and Lydia felt another piece of the past settle into place. Not forgotten, but forgiven. Released. "That was big of him,"
Elias observed as they continued walking.
It was. I didn't expect it.
Lydia squeezed his hand. Maybe people can change. Maybe second chances are worth giving. Speaking of second chances, Elias stopped walking and turned to face her. I talked to your father this morning, before church. Lydia's heart began to race. And? And he gave me his blessing. Also gave me a ring. Said it was your grandmother's, then your mother's. Said he wanted me to have it to offer you. Elias pulled a small box from his pocket, and Lydia's breath caught. Now, I know we're standing in the middle of Main Street, and I know this isn't particularly private or romantic, but I also know I can't wait another minute. So Lydia Monroe, will you— Yes. She didn't let him finish, couldn't wait that long. Yes, absolutely yes. Elias laughed, joy transforming his face, and opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the afternoon light. You didn't let me finish the question. I didn't need to. The answer's yes. She held out her left hand and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. People were starting to notice, heads turning, voices rising in excitement. Within moments, a crowd had gathered, and someone was shouting congratulations. Mrs. Chen appeared from her cafe with tears streaming down her face. The widow Peterson clapped her hands with delight. Even Sheriff Boone, passing by on patrol, stopped to shake Elias's hand and kiss Lydia's cheek. Well, Elias said, pulling Lydia close despite the audience, I guess it's official now. I guess it is. She looked up at him, this man who'd changed everything just by believing in her. When should we get married? Tomorrow? He said it hopefully, and she laughed. My father would kill you. We need time to plan, to do this properly. 2 weeks? Elias. Fine, a month, but not a day longer, Lydia Monroe. I've waited long enough. A month, she agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that made the watching crowd cheer and whistle. Let them watch. Let them celebrate. This was her life, her love, her future, and she was claiming it in front of everyone. That evening, Mrs. Langford appeared at the store with Catherine and 3 other women, all of them carrying fabric and sewing supplies. We're here to help make your wedding dress, Mrs. Langford announced. Every bride deserves a proper dress, and you're going to have the finest one Sage Creek has ever seen. Lydia was so overwhelmed she could barely speak. These women who'd criticized her, who'd whispered about her behind fans and across fence posts, were now offering to help her celebrate the most important day of her life. I don't know what to say. Say yes and let us fuss over you. Mrs. Langford was already pulling out measuring tapes. You've earned this, dear. You've earned all of it. They spent hours that evening discussing designs and taking measurements, and Lydia found herself laughing more than she had in years. The women shared stories about their own weddings, offered advice about marriage, and treated her like she was already part of their circle. By the time they left, promising to return the next evening to start sewing, Lydia felt like she'd been given something precious: acceptance, friendship, belonging. Her father watched from his chair, smiling. Your mother would have loved this. Would have loved all of it. The proposal, the dress planning, the way the whole town's coming together. I wish she could be here. Lydia sat down across from him, the ring heavy and wonderful on her finger. I wish she could meet Elias. She knows. Wherever she is, she knows, and she's happy for you. James leaned forward. Lydia, I want you to know something. When your mother died, I thought about giving up. Thought about selling the store and moving somewhere else. Somewhere without memories. But I had you, and you needed stability, needed a home. So I stayed and I built this place into something we could both be proud of. And now, watching you here with Elias, seeing you so happy, I know I made the right choice. You were worth every sacrifice, every hard day, every moment of doubt. Papa? Lydia's voice broke. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just be happy. That's all I ever wanted. He stood and pulled her up, holding her close. Now, we've got a wedding to plan and a store to run. Let's get some sleep while we can. But Lydia lay awake again that night, turning the ring on her finger, marveling at how quickly life could change. A month ago, she'd been alone and resigned to it. Now she was engaged, accepted, loved. Now she had everything she'd secretly dreamed of but never dared to hope for.
Now she had a future that gleamed as bright as the diamond on her hand. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. The women of Sage Creek descended on Lydia with enthusiasm, insisting on helping with every detail. The dress came together beautifully, cream silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, a design that was elegant without being fussy. Mrs. Peterson offered her home for the reception since it was the largest in town. Pastor Williams agreed to perform the ceremony in the church, and half the town seemed determined to attend. Elias threw himself into his deputy work, saving every penny of his salary toward their future. He and Lydia had decided to stay in the rooms above the store after the wedding, at least until they could afford a place of their own. James had insisted, saying the space was plenty big enough, and he enjoyed having company. Secretly, Lydia suspected her father wasn't quite ready to let her go completely, and she was grateful for his offer. They spent their evenings together, walking through town or sitting on the porch, talking about their plans. Elias wanted children eventually, and so did Lydia, though the thought terrified her. He wanted to save enough money to buy a small ranch outside town someday, somewhere they could raise horses and have space to breathe. She wanted to expand the store, maybe add a lending library or a small cafe. Their dreams wove together like threads in a tapestry, creating a picture of a life that was uniquely theirs. The night before the wedding, Lydia's father pulled her aside. "I have something for you, something your mother wanted you to have when you got married." He handed her a small wooden box, worn smooth with age. "Open it." Inside was a letter in her mother's handwriting, yellowed with time, but still legible. Lydia's hands shook as she unfolded it. "My dearest Lydia," it read, "if you're reading this, then you're about to be married, and I'm not there to see it. I'm sorry for that. Sorry I won't see the woman you've become. Sorry I won't meet the man who won your heart. But I want you to know something important. Being married isn't about losing yourself. It's about finding someone who helps you become more of who you already are. It's about partnership, respect, and choosing each other every single day. Don't let anyone, not society, not well-meaning friends, not even your husband, make you smaller than you are. You were born to be mighty, my darling girl. Never forget that. All my love, always. Mama." Lydia read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in the box. "Thank you, Papa. I can't even..." She wrote it a week before she died. "Made me promise to give it to you on your wedding day." James's voice was thick with emotion. "She knew she wouldn't be here, but she wanted you to know she was thinking of you, believing in you, always." That night, Lydia slept with the letter under her pillow, feeling her mother's presence like a blessing. And when she woke the next morning, her wedding day, the sun was streaming through the windows and her heart was full of joy and anticipation and the bone-deep certainty that she was about to step into the life she was meant to live, the life she'd fought for, survived for, chosen for herself, the life that began with a rifle, a cowboy's grin, and the courage to believe she deserved to be loved exactly as she was. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, the kind of October day that made Colorado famous: crisp air, brilliant sunshine, and mountains standing sharp against a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Lydia woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep any longer, and lay in bed listening to the sounds of the town stirring to life. Somewhere, a rooster crowed. Somewhere else, a dog barked. Ordinary sounds on an extraordinary day. She rose and washed carefully, taking her time with each ritual. This was the last morning she'd wake up as Lydia Monroe, unmarried woman. By sunset, she'd be Lydia Carter, and the thought made her heart race with anticipation and just a touch of fear. Not fear of Elias or of marriage itself, but the natural anxiety that came with any great change, any leap into the unknown. Her father was already up, making coffee in the kitchen, and he looked up as she entered. His eyes were red-rimmed, and she realized he'd been crying. "Papa? I'm all right." He pulled her into a fierce hug. "Just thinking about your mother, wishing she could be here. She'd be so proud of you, Lydia, so proud of the woman you've become." "I feel her here," Lydia said quietly. "Her letter, her ring, her spirit. She's part of this day even if she can't be here in person." They had breakfast together, neither one eating much, both too emotional for appetite. James kept looking at his daughter like he was memorizing her face, and Lydia found herself doing the same to him. After today, everything would be different. Not bad, just different. The shape of their family was changing, expanding to include Elias and eventually others. It was beautiful and bittersweet all at once. At 9 o'clock, Mrs. Langford arrived with Catherine and 3 other women, all of them carrying the finished wedding dress and various supplies for hair and makeup. They shooed James out of the living quarters with good-natured firmness and took over, transforming the space into a bride's dressing room. The dress was even more beautiful than Lydia remembered. The cream silk seemed to glow in the morning light, and the lace was so delicate it looked like frost. "Let's get you ready," Mrs. Langford said, her voice gentler than Lydia had ever heard it. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride Sage Creek has ever seen." They helped her into the dress, fastening the dozens of tiny buttons up the back, adjusting the fit until it was perfect. Catherine did her hair, pinning it up in an elaborate style that was both elegant and practical, soft curls framing her face, the rest secured with pins, and the small pearl comb that had been her mother's. Mrs. Chen arrived with flowers, wildflowers gathered from the hills, tied with cream ribbon, and pressed them into Lydia's hands. "You look like a dream," the widow Peterson said, her voice thick with tears. "An absolute dream." Lydia looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked softer somehow, more feminine, but her eyes held the same strength and determination they always had. The dress didn't change who she was, it just framed it differently. She was still the woman who could shoot tin cans off a fence at 30 paces, who'd faced down outlaws and won. The dress was just another kind of armor, one meant for celebration instead of battle. At 10:30 her father returned, dressed in his best suit with a flower pinned to his lapel. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her, and tears spilled down his cheeks without shame. "Oh, Lydia, you look just like your mother did on our wedding day. Just exactly like her." "Don't make me cry," Lydia warned, but her own voice was wavering. "I'll ruin whatever Mrs. Langford did to my face." "Let it be ruined." James crossed to her and took both her hands. "This is what matters. You, happy, about to marry a good man. Everything else is just window dressing." The women gave them a moment of privacy, stepping out onto the landing, and James pulled something from his pocket. It was a small silver locket on a delicate chain. "This was your mother's. I gave it to her on our wedding day. Inside is a piece of her hair and a piece of mine, braided together. I want you to wear it today, so she can be close to your heart." Lydia couldn't speak. She just turned so her father could fasten the locket around her neck, feeling the cool metal settle against her skin. When she turned back, she pulled him into a hug, not caring if it wrinkled the dress. "Thank you, Papa, for everything, for raising me, for teaching me to be strong, for letting me be who I am, for approving of Elias and supporting us, for all of it. You're my daughter, my joy, my pride." James's voice broke. "It's been an honor to be your father, Lydia, an absolute honor." At 11 o'clock, they walked together through town toward the church. Word had spread that the bride was coming, and people lined the street to watch. Children threw flower petals. Women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Men removed their hats respectfully. It felt like the whole town had turned out to witness this moment, to celebrate not just a wedding, but everything it represented: survival, courage, love, found in the midst of chaos. The church doors stood open, and inside Lydia could hear the soft murmur of voices, the rustle of people settling into pews. Pastor Williams appeared in the doorway, smiling, and gestured for them to wait. "The groom's ready. Are you?" "I've been ready since the moment he asked," Lydia said, and meant it with her whole heart. The church organ began to play, and James offered his arm. They walked down the aisle together, and Lydia was dimly aware of faces turning toward her, Mrs. Langford dabbing her eyes, Sheriff Boone standing tall and proud, the women from her shooting lessons smiling and crying simultaneously. But her focus narrowed to the man standing at the altar, and everything else fell away. Elias looked devastating in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. But it was his expression that made Lydia's breath catch, pure, unfiltered love and wonder, like he couldn't quite believe this was real. As she approached, she saw his eyes glisten with tears, and that gave her permission to let her own fall freely. James placed her hand in Elias's and stepped back, but not before whispering, "Take care of my girl." "With my life," Elias promised, and James nodded, satisfied. Pastor Williams began the ceremony, his voice resonant in the packed church. Lydia heard the words as if from a great distance: love, honor, cherish, commitment. She responded when required, but her focus was on Elias, on the way he was looking at her like she'd hung the stars just for him. When it came time for vows, Elias spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. Lydia, I came to this town a drifter with no plans beyond the next cattle drive. Then I saw you shooting that Winchester like you owned the world, and everything changed. You showed me what it means to be brave, to stand for something, to refuse to be less than you are. You saved my life that night in the store. But you saved more than that. You saved me from a life of just drifting through, never connecting, never belonging. I promise to stand with you, not in front of you or behind you, but beside you. I promise to see you always as you are and never ask you to be smaller. I promise to love you fiercely, protect you faithfully, and spend every day of my life trying to deserve the gift of your love. This I swear before God and everyone here. Lydia was crying openly now, and she didn't care. When it was her turn, she spoke from her heart, no prepared words, just truth. Elias, you saw me when everyone else was looking at who they thought I should be. You valued my strength instead of fearing it. You stood beside me when bullets were flying and never once suggested I should hide or let you handle it alone. You gave me partnership when the world kept offering me protection. You gave me love that doesn't ask me to change. I promise to be your partner in all things, to stand with you through whatever comes, to build a life with you that honors both of us. I promise to love you with everything I am, to choose you every single day, and to never forget that the best decision I ever made was saying yes when you asked me to marry you. This I swear before everyone who matters. Pastor Williams smiled through his own tears and pronounced them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Elias pulled Lydia close and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, with no regard for the watching crowd. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and when they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing, Lydia felt joy so complete it was almost painful. This was it. This was the moment everything became real, became permanent, became forever. They walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, pelted with rice and flower petals, grinning so hard their faces hurt. Outside, the October sunshine was blinding after the dimness of the church, and Sage Creek had never looked more beautiful. Someone had decorated the street with ribbons and flowers, and a wagon stood ready to take them to the widow Peterson's house for the reception. But before they could climb in, Tommy Haskins stepped forward, looking sheepish but determined. Mrs. Carter, that sounds strange to say. I wanted to give you something, a wedding present, I guess, and an apology. He held out a wooden box, and when Lydia opened it, she found 6 perfectly carved tin cans, each one painted with flowers, and her and Elias's initials. To replace the ones you shot that first morning, figured you might want to remember where it all started. Lydia was so moved she couldn't speak for a moment. Then she stepped forward and hugged Tommy, feeling him stiffen in surprise before relaxing. Thank you. This is perfect. Truly perfect. You deserve to be happy, Tommy said gruffly. Both of you. I'm glad you found each other. The reception at the widow Peterson's house was everything a wedding celebration should be. Music and dancing, food and laughter, toasts that made people cry, and jokes that made them laugh. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast, and every table groaned under the weight of dishes. The wedding cake was 3 layers tall, decorated with sugar flowers, and when Lydia and Elias cut it together, feeding each other bites, the crowd cheered like it was the greatest accomplishment in history. Sheriff Boone gave a toast, calling Elias the finest deputy he'd ever had, and Lydia the bravest woman in the territory. James gave a toast that had everyone in tears, talking about his late wife and how proud she would be of their daughter. Mrs. Langford gave a surprisingly emotional toast about second chances and learning not to judge what you don't understand. By the time the toasts were finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As the sun began to set, casting everything in gold and amber light, Elias pulled Lydia onto the makeshift dance floor. They swayed together to a fiddle tune, and Lydia rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid reality of him. the absolute rightness of this moment. Happy? He murmured into her hair. Happier than I knew was possible. She pulled back to look at him. I love you, Elias Carter. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Don't be scared. I've got you. He kissed her forehead. And I love you too, Lydia Carter. Going to love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that. That's the plan. They danced until the stars came out, until the party began to wind down and people started drifting home. James approached them as they were preparing to leave, pulling Lydia into one more hug. The rooms upstairs are all yours tonight. I'm staying with the widow Peterson. She's got a spare room and insisted I use it. Give you two some privacy. Papa, you don't have to. Yes, I do. You're married now, and you deserve a proper wedding night without your father in the next room. He shook Elias's hand. Take care of her. Always, Elias promised. They walked back to the store through quiet streets, hand in hand, not talking much, but not needing to. Everything had been said that needed saying. Now it was just about being together, starting this new chapter, learning to navigate married life. The store was dark when they arrived, but Lydia knew every inch of it by heart. They climbed the stairs to the living quarters, and Elias lit a lamp, casting soft golden light across the room. Someone, probably Mrs. Chen, had been here earlier because there were flowers in vases and fresh linens on the bed and a bottle of wine with 2 glasses on the table. Well, Elias said, suddenly seeming nervous. Here we are. Married. Here we are. Lydia set down her bouquet and turned to face him. Help me with these buttons? There's about 1,000 of them. His hands were gentle as he worked the tiny buttons free, and Lydia felt anticipation build with each one that came undone. When the dress finally loosened, she stepped out of it carefully and hung it over a chair, standing before her husband in just her chemise and stockings. Elias's breath caught, and his eyes darkened with desire. You're so beautiful, he said roughly. I've been wanting you since the moment we met, and now you're finally mine. I was always mine, Lydia corrected gently, but now I choose to be yours too. There's a difference. I know. He crossed to her and cupped her face in his hands, and that's what makes it perfect. You're choosing this, choosing me, choosing us. Not because you have to, but because you want to. I do want to. She began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite her racing heart. I want everything with you, Elias. The life, the partnership, the love, all of it. They came together like they'd been made for it, like every moment since they'd met had been leading to this. Elias was tender and patient, making sure she was comfortable, that she was with him every step of the way. And Lydia discovered that intimacy with someone you loved, someone who saw you and valued you and chose you, was transcendent in a way she'd never imagined. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, a joining that went deeper than bodies. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the lamplight, and Lydia traced patterns on Elias's chest with her fingers. I never thought I'd have this, she said quietly. A husband who loves me, a life that feels right, a future that looks bright. I'd convinced myself I didn't need it, that independence was enough. And now? Now I know that independence and partnership aren't opposites. I can be strong and still let you in. I can be capable and still accept help. I can be myself and still be part of an us. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. You taught me that. You and this whole experience. Elias pulled her back down into his arms. You taught me something too. You taught me that home isn't a place. It's a person. I spent years looking for somewhere to belong, and all along I was looking for someone. I was looking for you. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, the lamp burning low, the night settling soft and peaceful around them. Outside, Sage Creek slept under stars that had witnessed everything: the arrival of a drifter, the courage of a woman with a rifle, the violence that brought them together, and the love that bloomed from chaos. The town that had once whispered scandal now whispered blessing. And Lydia Monroe Carter slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who'd finally found their place in the world. The months that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. Winter came to Colorado with the usual force: snow piling high in the streets, temperatures dropping until water froze in buckets overnight. But the store stayed warm and busy, and Lydia and Elias settled into married life with an ease that suggested they'd been together for years instead of months. Elias proved to be an excellent deputy, handling disputes with patience and lawbreakers with firmness. He and Sheriff Boone developed a rhythm that worked well, and crime in Sage Creek dropped noticeably. The town felt safer, more stable, and people credited the two lawmen who patrolled the streets with quiet competence. Lydia continued running the store with her father, and business thrived. Word had spread about the woman who'd fought off the Barlow gang, and people came from surrounding towns just to meet her and shop at Monroe's General Store. She used the increased profits to expand their inventory and add the lending library she'd dreamed of, a corner of the store with comfortable chairs and shelves of books that people could borrow for a small fee. It became a gathering place for townspeople looking for education and escape. The shooting lessons continued every Sunday, and the group of women grew until Lydia had to split them into 2 sessions to accommodate everyone. She taught not just marksmanship, but confidence, showing women that they could protect themselves and their families if needed. Several of the women got so good that they started entering shooting competitions in nearby towns, bringing home prizes and pride. Lydia watched them transform from nervous beginners to capable shooters, and she felt proud to have played a part in their growth. In February, news came that the 5th member of the Barlow gang, Pete Hoskins, had been caught trying to rob a bank in Wyoming. He'd been sentenced to 20 years in prison, bringing final closure to that dark chapter. Roy Barlow was already serving life in a territorial prison, and the other gang members were dead or scattered. Justice, slow but inevitable, had been served. Spring brought warmer weather and a surprise that changed everything. Lydia had been feeling strange for weeks, tired, queasy, emotional in ways that seemed excessive even for her. When she finally worked up the courage to see Doc Miller, he examined her and delivered news that left her speechless. "You're pregnant, Mrs. Carter. About 3 months along, I'd say. Baby should come in early September." Lydia sat in stunned silence for a long moment. A baby. She was going to be a mother. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "Are you sure?" "Very sure. You're healthy, the baby seems to be developing normally, and you should have a straightforward pregnancy if you take care of yourself." Doc Miller smiled. "Congratulations. I assume your husband will be pleased?" "I think so. I hope so." Lydia stood on shaky legs. "Thank you, doctor. I need to go tell him." She found Elias at the sheriff's office, filling out paperwork, and the moment he saw her face, he was on his feet. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Better than fine." She took his hands, and suddenly tears were streaming down her face. "Elias, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." His expression went through a series of changes: shock, disbelief, and then pure blazing joy. He let out a whoop that probably scared half the town and picked her up, spinning her in a circle before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "A baby. We're having a baby. In September." She was laughing and crying simultaneously. "I'm terrified and excited, and I have no idea how to be a mother, but we'll figure it out together." He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, then pulled back and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her nose. "I love you. I love you so much, and I already love this baby." "So do I." Lydia placed her hands over her still flat stomach. "So do I." They told her father that evening, and James cried openly, pulling Lydia into a hug and thanking God that he'd lived to see his grandchild. He immediately began planning an expansion of the living quarters to give them more space, sketching designs and calculating costs. The news spread through town with the usual speed, and within days people were stopping by to offer congratulations and advice. Mrs. Chen brought herbs she swore would help with morning sickness. The widow Peterson started knitting blankets. Mrs. Langford arrived with a cradle that had belonged to her grandmother, beautifully preserved and perfect. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Lydia's body changed in ways that were strange and miraculous. The subtle rounding of her belly, the first fluttering movements that became stronger kicks as the baby grew. Elias was constantly amazed by it, placing his hands on her stomach to feel the baby move, talking to the child like it could already hear him. His wonder and excitement made Lydia fall even more deeply in love with him. In August, they received unexpected news. The territorial governor, impressed by the story of how Sage Creek had defended itself against the Barlow gang, sent a commendation to Sheriff Boone, Deputy Carter, and Lydia Monroe Carter for their bravery. The letter praised their courage and noted that they'd set an example for other small towns facing lawlessness. It wasn't just recognition, it was validation that what they'd done mattered. "Listen to this," James read aloud from the letter one evening. "Mrs. Carter's actions demonstrate that courage knows no gender, and her willingness to defend her property and community serves as an inspiration to all citizens of this territory. Well, how about that?" "It's embarrassing," Lydia said, though she was secretly pleased. "It's deserved." Elias took her hand. "You saved lives that night, including mine. You should be recognized for it." The commendation was framed and hung in the sheriff's office, and people came from all over to see it and hear the story. Lydia found herself telling it over and over, and each time it felt a little less raw, a little more like history instead of trauma. The weight of having killed a man never entirely left her, but it became something she could carry, a scar that reminded her of her strength instead of her shame. September arrived with cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color in the aspens. Lydia's due date came and went, and she grew increasingly uncomfortable and impatient. Finally, on a Tuesday morning just after dawn, her water broke and contractions began. Elias ran for Doc Miller while James stayed with Lydia, helping her breathe through the pain and assuring her everything would be fine. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Elias paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, refusing to leave despite James's assurances that everything was normal. Inside, Lydia labored with Mrs. Chen and Doc Miller at her side, coaching her through contractions and offering encouragement. The pain was unlike anything she'd experienced, worse than being shot at, worse than any physical injury, but she endured it with the same grit that had gotten her through everything else. Just before midnight, with one final push that took every bit of strength she had left, Lydia delivered a baby girl. The infant's cry pierced the air, loud and healthy and indignant, and Lydia fell back against the pillows, exhausted but overwhelmed with love at the sound. "It's a girl," Doc Miller announced, cleaning the baby quickly before placing her on Lydia's chest. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Lydia looked down at her daughter, tiny and perfect, with a fuzz of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right into her soul, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "Hello?" she whispered. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." The door burst open and Elias appeared, his face wild with worry. "Lydia, are you— oh my God." He approached slowly, reverently, and when he saw the baby, his entire expression transformed. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and touched one finger to his daughter's tiny hand. She immediately grasped it, her grip surprisingly strong, and Elias let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She's perfect," he breathed. "She's absolutely perfect. Are you all right?" "I'm wonderful." Lydia was crying again, tears of exhaustion and joy and wonder. "She's here. Our daughter is here." "What will you name her?" James asked from the doorway, his own eyes wet with tears. Lydia looked at Elias, and they shared a moment of silent communication. They'd discussed names for months, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter's face, Lydia knew exactly what was right. "Grace," she said softly. "Grace Elizabeth Carter. Elizabeth for my mother, Grace for what she represents. The Grace that brought us together, that saved us, that gave us this incredible life." "Grace Elizabeth Carter," Elias repeated, testing it out. "It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect." He leaned in and kissed Lydia gently. "Thank you. For her, for us, for everything." Little Grace yawned, making a sound like a tiny kitten, and both her parents laughed with delight. Doc Miller finished his work, declared mother and baby healthy, and left them alone with James, who couldn't stop staring at his granddaughter with wonder. "She looks like her grandmother," he said finally. "Same nose, same chin. Your mother would have loved her so much, Lydia." "She does love her. From wherever she is, she loves her." Lydia held Grace closer, marveling at the weight and warmth of her. And Grace will grow up knowing about the grandmother who wanted her to be mighty, who believed women could be anything they chose to be. In the weeks that followed, Grace became the center of their world. She was a good baby, content to sleep and eat and be held, and watching Elias with his daughter was one of Lydia's greatest joys. He was gentle and attentive, changing diapers without complaint, and walking the floor at midnight when Grace was fussy. He sang to her in a soft baritone, made silly faces to make her smile, and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The town embraced Grace with enthusiasm. Women brought gifts and advice, men congratulated Elias on his daughter, and children came to peer at the baby with wide eyes. Grace's christening in October was attended by what seemed like half the territory, and Pastor Williams blessed her as a child of strength and grace, born to parents who'd proven their courage. As autumn deepened into winter and Grace grew from a newborn into a bright, alert infant, Lydia reflected on everything that had changed in just over a year. She'd gone from a lonely woman shooting tin cans at dawn to a wife, mother, and respected member of her community. She'd faced violence and survived. She'd found love and built a family. She'd learned that strength didn't mean standing alone. It meant knowing when to let others stand with you. One evening in December, with snow falling soft outside and a fire crackling in the stove, Lydia sat nursing Grace while Elias read aloud from a book and her father dozed in his chair. It was utterly ordinary and completely perfect, the kind of domestic scene she'd never imagined for herself, the kind of happiness she'd thought was reserved for other people, people who fit better into society's expectations. Elias looked up from his book and caught her watching him. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. How we got here, how lucky I am, how grateful." She smiled at him over Grace's downy head. "I was thinking about that first morning when you rode past and saw me shooting. If you hadn't stopped, if you just kept riding, but I did stop, I couldn't help it. You were the most magnificent thing I'd ever seen, standing there with your rifle like you owned the world, and I knew immediately that my life had just changed." He set down the book and moved to sit beside her on the sofa, careful not to disturb Grace. "Everything I have, everything I am now, it all started with you and that Winchester." "They mocked me for carrying that rifle," Lydia said softly. "Called me unnatural, said I'd die alone. But that rifle led me to my wife." Elias finished the sentence they'd both said before, the phrase that had become part of their story. "And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for it." Grace finished nursing and made a small, satisfied sound, and Lydia lifted her to burp against her shoulder. The baby's warmth, her sweet, milky smell, the absolute trust with which she relaxed into her mother's arms. It was almost overwhelming. This tiny person, this perfect combination of Lydia and Elias, this promise of the future. "I want to tell her stories," Lydia said. "When she's old enough to understand, I want to tell her about her grandmother who believed women should be mighty, about the rifle and the courage it represented, about the night we fought off outlaws and I learned what I was capable of, about her father who chose to stay when he could have left, who saw me and loved me exactly as I was. We'll tell her together," Elias promised, "and we'll raise her to be brave and strong and certain of her worth. We'll teach her to shoot if she wants to learn, and to read, and to think for herself. We'll raise her to be exactly who she is, whoever that turns out to be." "She'll be magnificent," Lydia kissed Grace's head. "How could she not be, with the family she has?" James stirred in his chair and opened his eyes, looking at the three of them with such love that it made Lydia's throat tight. "Your mother would be so proud," he said, echoing words he'd said before but that never lost their power. "So very proud." Later that night, after Grace had been settled in her cradle and James had retired to his own room, Lydia and Elias lay in bed together, hands linked in the darkness. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Sage Creek in white silence. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers, and the house creaked softly as it settled. "Are you happy?" Elias asked, the same question he'd asked on their wedding day and many times since. Deliriously, Lydia rolled to face him, though she could barely see his features in the darkness. "More than I ever thought possible. You?" "More than I have words for." He pulled her closer. "I came to this town with nothing, and I found everything. I found home. I found purpose. I found you. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, and Lydia's last conscious thought was of gratitude for the rifle that had defined her, for the cowboy who'd seen her worth, for the courage that had carried her through darkness, and for the love that had made everything else possible. She'd been mocked for being different, for refusing to be small, for carrying a Winchester instead of needlework. But that difference, that refusal, that rifle, they'd led her here, to this moment, to this life, to this perfect, imperfect, beautiful reality. And as she drifted into sleep, she could swear she heard her mother's voice, soft and approving, whispering the words from her letter. You were born to be mighty, my darling girl. She had been. She was. And now she would teach her daughter to be the same. The rifle still hung above their mantel, polished and ready, a reminder of where they'd started and what they'd survived. A symbol not of violence, but of strength, not of fear, but of courage, not of standing alone, but of choosing to stand together. It had been with Lydia through her loneliest days, through her darkest night, and through her greatest triumph. And it would stay there, honored and remembered, a testament to the woman who'd refused to be anything less than herself, and to the man who'd loved her, not despite that refusal, but because of it. In Sage Creek, Colorado, in the winter of 1877, the story became legend. Not just the story of the shootout, but the whole tale of how a rifle-carrying woman and a drifting cowboy found each other and built something real. Mothers told it to their daughters as a lesson about staying true to yourself. Fathers told it to their sons as a reminder to value strength in any form. And when anyone asked how it started, how two people from such different worlds came together, the answer was always the same. They mocked her for carrying a rifle until a cowboy said, "That's the woman I'd marry." And he meant it, and she believed him. And together, they built a life worth living, fierce and tender and completely their own. That was the beginning, the middle, and the happily ever after. That was the truth that endured long after the details faded. That was the story that mattered. And it all started